Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about What If Deku Was Everyone's Crush Part 1. If you guys enjoy this What If and want to see Part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗵𝗃 𝗔𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 from Wattpad. So let's start the video. Boku no Hero Academia. Izuku's 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Academia disclaimer. This is a mature-rated fanfiction story of Boku no Hero Academia that I am writing for RDC fun. Needless to say, this story is AU. The characters may seem OOC to some and there will be smutty lemons. Also, I own nothing of the series other than the fanfiction stories that I make. Chapter 1. Brainjacking Villainous. A cheerful girl with short brown hair, visible pink blushes on her cheeks, large round eyes and soft pads on fingertips named Uraraka Ochako was on her way to a high school. The high school which she was currently attending to learn how to be a pro hero had recently built some dorms for students to live in. Considering recent events, including the villain attack during summer camp and All Might's retirement after fighting a certain terrifying villain, she understood why the school deemed it necessary to build the dorms for the students' safety. Speaking of safety, Ochako frowned in worry as she thought about her friend, Midoriya Izuku. A boy with bright green eyes, fluffy dark green hair and freckles on his face, the boy had suffered much due to his fight with an infamous villain known as Muscular during the summer camp attack. Her heart could not help but clench at the awful memory of his broken body as he cried in despair due to failing to save Bakugo Katsuki from getting kidnapped by the villains. Although Izuku's injuries had healed and Katsuki had been rescued, she still worried for the boy whom she could not help, but like a lot. She was so distracted by her thoughts that she failed to notice that a small blob of pink slime slipping into her luggage bag at the dorms after her homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shoyuta, told her and her classmates their room arrangements. Ochako immediately went to her room to unpack her belongings. Due to being poor, she did not have much to unpack. However, just as she was opening her luggage bag, the blob of amorphous pink slime which had been hiding inside it suddenly leapt out and covered her face. Too shocked by the sudden attack to even scream, she struggled futilely as the slime started to engulf her face and even probe into her ears. After a few seconds, her weakening struggles stopped entirely as the slime oozed into her head through her ears. As soon as the last of the slime entered her head, her eyes opened and she wore an uncharacteristic smirk as she thought, "Finally, I thought I'd never get myself a new host." Getting up onto her feet and looking over herself, the obviously parasitic being inside Ochako thought to itself, not a bad body to stay in if I have to say so myself. It then looked into Ochako's memories and thought, and a student of a high school itself no less. I can definitely make use of this situation. What's going on? Why am I not in control of my own body and why do I have a voice in my head? Cried the real Ochako, who was basically trapped in her own mind. The parasitic being made Ochako's body strike a villainous pose as it mentally replied to her, "Well, if you must know, I'm what you may call a villainous. You can call me Brainjacker." Realization hit Ochako as she replied, "You're that slime that jumped out of my bag and onto my face just now." Bingo! I barely survived the Kamino incident which forced All Might to retire after defeating that monster of a villain, replied Brainjacker, who mentally scowled as she added, "If it wasn't for the fact that I could move around and survive for a few days without a host, I would have been trapped under all that rubble along with my last host. Why you won't get away with this? Deku will notice something is wrong with me and—" "No, he won't," said Brainjacker, who then smugly explained, "You see, my quirk, Parasite Slime, allows me to gain control over any biological woman that I inhabit. Not only that, I can read your memories to not only mimic your behavior and mannerisms perfectly but even uncover certain secrets about you, such as your crush on a certain someone." Ochako was panicking as she mentally squeaked, Why you know that already?" Brainjacker smirked and licked her finger with eager anticipation as she mentally replied, "That's right, and I know exactly what I'm going to do while I'm in your body. You see, I'm the kind of villainess who enjoys toying with my victims by making them have sex with men." Suddenly, she saw images of Ochako's fears and her visage became a disgusted scowl as she added, "Hey, Just because I enjoy making my victims have sex with men doesn't mean that I don't have standards. So you're not going to force me to have sex with random men or break Deku's heart? Asked 𝗀𝗧𝗪, who was hoping that such would be the case. Don't get me wrong, I am certainly in control of your body. However, if your emotions get too strong for me to ignore, for the lack of a better term, I'll start feeling them as though they are my own. Needless to say, I'd rather not feel your feelings of despair and hatred if I can help it, explained brainjacker, who then added, of course, there is the option of suppressing your consciousness so that I do not have to put up with your emotions and thoughts, but even I can't forcefully suppress it indefinitely unless you let me do so. The longer I forcefully keep your consciousness suppressed, the harder it will be for me to do so without losing control of your body. That said, I can freely alter your energy and fill your mind with lewd ideas, so there's always the possibility of you becoming the cum dump of your class by the time I'm through with you. But you won't, as long as I strongly refuse to submit and you wish to avoid feeling my negative emotions, said 𝗀𝗧𝗪, who was beginning to have a grasp of brainjacker's abilities and limitations. Brainjack nodded and replied, that is undeniably true, unless you change your mind at some point and decide to be a complete slut. So what will stop you from making me so pent up that I would allow even Mineta to have sex with me? 𝗀𝗧𝗪 was talking about Mineta Minoru, a short boy with purple ball in place of hair on his head and a complete pervert whom the girls had beaten up on more than one occasion due to his perverted antics. Understandably, 𝗀𝗧𝗪 did not want to even think about the idea of having sex with him. To be perfectly honest, it's mostly up to your feelings and morality. If your feelings for that Deku boy wins out, the worst I can do is make you his personal PP sleeve, replied brainjacker. That's already more than awful enough, cried 𝗀𝗧𝗪. And I'm a villain, so I don't really care as long as I can have my fun, replied brainjacker, who then gloated, tonight's going to be a fun night. A short while later, the currently brainjacked 𝗀𝗧𝗪 had just finished unpacking her things and decided to approach a room which belonged to her friend, 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐳, a frog-like girl who has long dark green hair, large oval eyes and an impressively long and dexterous tongue. 𝗬𝗠 seemed to be upset about something ever since the 𝗵𝐻 incident. Although brainjacker had no reason to care about the girl who often wore a vacant expression and spoke bluntly, she knew that 𝗬𝗠 was 𝗀𝗧𝗪's friend, and the Villainous was more than happy to add 𝗬𝗠 in her collection of brainjacked victims by using her ability to create mentally linked copies of herself to brainjack more victims. Please, leave 𝗬𝗠-chan out of this, begged 𝗀𝗧𝗪. Nope, I'm going to take over her body and then make the both of you have your way with that boy, declared brainjacker. Although there was no denying that 𝗀𝗧𝗪 was strongly against her plans, brainjacker had enough experience with controlling unwilling hosts to know how to handle the issue. The first step which she took was to be frank and honest with 𝗀𝗧𝗪 about her quirk and its limitations to prevent 𝗀𝗧𝗪 from feeling too much panic or fear towards the villain. The second step was to limit her villainous actions to one step at a time, so that 𝗀𝗧𝗪 would not have enough emotional strength to overwhelm the villain's ability to ignore her feelings. The final step was to play along with 𝗀𝗧𝗪's personal desires, including romantic and artsy fantasies, as she would be less able to resist brainjacker's decision to essentially fulfill them. Brainjacker especially loved the third step, as she pointed out. Besides, who would have thought that you would be so open to the idea of being more than just a friend with that girl, 𝗬𝗠? That's because you filled my head with all those perverted ideas, argued 𝗀𝗧𝗪. True, but the fact that you're actually interested in them means that you're not as pure-hearted as you think, 𝗀𝗧𝗪-chan, replied the villain, who said 𝗀𝗧𝗪's name with a deliberately affectionate manner. Even if you're right, that doesn't mean that I want you to take over her body and force her to do all of those things to me against her will. Deny your perverted interests all you want, 𝗀𝗧𝗪-chan, but even you can't deny that 𝗬𝗠's tongue offers so many fun possibilities, replied brainjacker. 𝗀𝗧𝗪's mind seemed to shut down in response due to sheer shame and embarrassment, as she failed to stop herself from imagining 𝗬𝗠 using her long frog-like tongue to pleasure her nether parts. Certain that 𝗀𝗧𝗪 would be unable to stop her no matter how hard she tried, brainjacker almost smirked as she knocked on 𝗬𝗠's door later that night. Izuku was puzzled when 𝗀𝗧𝗪 sent him a message after their classmates held the dorm room showcasing competition. His puzzlement changed into concern and nervousness when 𝗀𝗧𝗪 requested him to visit 𝗬𝗠's room as the frog girl wanted to tell him something important in private. Although nervous, he was a kind-hearted boy who cared for Tsuyu, so he did not think twice about making his way to her room to find out what she wanted to speak to him about. Before long, he stood in front of her door and was about to knock it when he heard Ochako's voice. "It's open, Deku. You can come in." Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Izuku opened the door and was surprised that the light in the room were not on. In spite of being puzzled by the lack of lighting, Izuku stepped into the room and said, "Pardon me for intruding." Suddenly, the door closed behind him and someone hugged him from behind. Shocked by the sudden embrace, Izuku panicked and almost tried to break free when he turned around and saw Ochako. He was so surprised by the sudden embrace from the girl whom he secretly pined for that it took him 5 seconds to notice that she was dressed only in a pink pair of cat-themed mittens which she probably wore to keep her touch-dependent quirk under control. When he finally noticed her state of dress, Izuku's entire face flushed red in embarrassment as he stuttered as quietly as he could to avoid being overheard by others. "Uraraka-san. Why are you dressed like that?" Ochako's embrace tightened as she nuzzled her face into his back and said, I want to be close to you, Deku." Hearing the vulnerability in her voice, Izuku stopped panicking as he continued to listen to her. "We all have been through so much recently and you got hurt so badly after your fight with that villain." Ochako's body trembled to hold back her tears as she continued to speak. "You could have died back there and I don't want to lose you." Filled with caring sympathy, Izuku all but forgot about Ochako's current state of dress as he spoke to her. "Uraraka-san, it's okay. I'm still here after all." "But what if there's another villain attack?" asked Ochako, who looked into Izuku's eyes as she continued to speak. "We have already gone through 2 villain attacks even though we're just students here and there's no way to be sure that you'll still be here after the next attack. Just thinking about losing you hurts so much." Realization dawned upon Izuku as he tentatively asked, "Uraraka-san, do you like me as more than a friend?" Uraraka nodded with tears in her eyes as she replied, "I do, Deku. As do I, Kero." Surprised by the familiar voice, Izuku turned around and his eyeballs nearly popped out of his head when he saw Tsuyu stand before him without any clothes on. As hard as he tried to avoid looking at her, the image of her attractive naked body was permanently seared into his mind. Turning his face away from Tsuyu with his eyes shut, Izuku stammered, Azui-san. Why are you naked too?" Seemingly unconcerned about her current state of dress, or lack thereof, Tsuyu approached Izuku and hugged him from the front. She then said, "Midoriya-chan, I want to apologize to you." Apologize?" asked Izuku. Tsuyu nodded and explained, "I always say what's on my mind, but there are also times when I have no idea what I should say. Do you remember what I said back at the hospital?" Recalling how Tsuyu said that he and 4 of their fellow classmates would be no different from villains if they violate 2 rules to rescue Katsuki from the League of Villains, Izuku hesitantly replied, "Why yeah, I do. Even though I sympathized with you and the others, my choice of words were severe. I was shocked beyond belief when I heard this morning that the 5 of you actually threw with it. I was so frustrated by my own cowardice and I had no idea what I could even say to any of you," explained Tsuyu. Izuku could feel her body tremble with barely repressed tears as she added, "I couldn't bring myself to have fun and chat with any of you as though nothing had happened between us. Just thinking about it made me feel so sad and lonely. That's why I have to apologize to all of you. And not that I don't appreciate the thought, but couldn't you have just spoken to all of us at the same time instead of doing this?" asked Izuku. "I wanted to apologize to you first, Midoriya-chan. I like you the same way Ochako-chan does." Really?" asked Izuku. Although Izuku was undoubtedly on friendly terms with Tsuyu, he did not expect her to have any special feelings for him. Considering that he was essentially a quirkless loser prior to being accepted as a student of high school, it was tragically understandable for him to not consider the possibility of being romantically liked by more than one girl. Tsuyu nodded and said, "Why else would I keep reminding you to call me Tsuyu-chan instead of letting you call me Azui-san?" Izuku was at a loss for words when Ochako spoke to him. "Deku, do you accept us?" Izuku turned around and looked into Ochako's eyes, which were brimming with tears. His heart clenched at seeing her longing expression while Tsuyu nuzzled into his chest. Tears welled up in Izuku's eyes as he made his decision and said with a nod, "Edo Ochako-chan, Tsuyu-chan. I honestly don't know where to even start with this relationship, but I'll do my best to make the both of you happy somehow." "Thank you, Deku," said Ochako. Suddenly, Izuku felt something slimy enter his ear and blacked out immediately after Izuku's blackout. "Where am I?" asked Izuku. "Just a moment ago, he was in Tsuyu's room and was being embraced by both Ochako and Tsuyu. As for the current situation, he was in some sort of black void. You're in, for the lack of a better term, a mindscape." Surprised, Izuku turned to see a appealing woman who was well-built, had sharp intelligent eyes and had dark straight hair. As he had never met the woman before, Izuku hesitantly asked, "Who are you and what do you mean by mindscape?" Instead of answering his question, the woman asked, "What is the last thing you remembered before coming here?" "Well, I was in a room with two of my friends and I suddenly felt..." Izuku's face paled as he then asked, "Are you telling me that a villain with some sort of brainwashing quirk managed to take over all of our bodies?" His expression fell into despair as he asked, "And that all those things that they said just now were just lies?" "Not quite. For one thing, that Villainous did manage to take over your two girlfriends, but she has not taken over your body yet. In fact, my friends are keeping that Villainous at bay, just like how we helped you break free from that brainwashing quirk back at the sports festival." Confused, Izuku asked, "What do you mean by helping me with that brainwashing quirk back at the..." He then remembered his fight with Shinso Hitoshi, a boy with indigo hair, very dark rings under his eyes and a brainwashing quirk which could only be activated by verbally responding to him. Upon realizing whom the woman was talking about, he pointed at her and exclaimed, "You're one of the former wielders of One for All." The woman nodded with a smile and said, "That's right, Midoriya Izuku. My name is Shimura Nana, Toshinori's predecessor and teacher." Bowing to the former wielder of One for All, a powerful quirk which had the ability to stockpile power and be passed down to a chosen successor, Izuku said, "It's an honor to finally meet you in person, Shimura-san." Chuckling at Izuku's earnest attitude, Nana smiled in a motherly way towards him and said, "I'm not all that great, Midoriya. If I was, I would have been able to defeat All for One and not leave that burden to Toshinori." Her expression became sad as she added, "Not to mention that I would have been able to protect my husband and not need to leave my own son to foster care for his own safety." "I'm sorry to hear that, Shimura-san," said Izuku, who thought about how his mother felt about his near death at the hands of that murderous villain, Muscular. Nana shook her head and said, "It's all in the past. As I am now, I'm little more than a memory of the person I once was before I gave my power to Toshinori. Also," her eyes hardened as she added, "we still have a pinch to get you out of. That Villainous is trying to take over your body, and while my friends can keep her at bay, we can't keep doing it forever. Sooner or later, one side will have to give in." Izuku wore a determined expression as he asked, "What can I do to break free of that villainous control and save my friends?" Nana smiled in approval as she replied, "The good news is, you are essentially linked to not only the Villainous but also to your two friends. If you can reach out to them and work together, you might be able to break free of her control." "Then that's exactly what I'll do," said Izuku, who then sheepishly added, "So how do I get to them?" "Just think about them and call out to them with all your heart. Which reminds me, that Villainous may have taken over their bodies, but my intuition tells me that their feelings of love towards you are very much real," replied Nana. Armed with Nana's guidance and reassurance, Izuku smiled at her and said, "Thank you, Shimura-san." He then took a deep breath before he called out to Ochako and Tsuyu the same way he used his quirk, "One for All, clench my butthole super tight and scream from the bottom of my heart." Ochako-chan. 𝗧𝗵𝗄. Meanwhile, Brainjacker was metaphorically gritting her teeth in frustration as she tried to take control of Izuku. She knew from past experience that male hosts were harder to control than female hosts, but Izuku was the most difficult host she had ever tried to control. Unlike female hosts, male hosts were more resistant to her ability to control their bodies, and she could neither suppress their consciousness nor read their memories without their consent. That said, she could immobilize their bodies, influence their energy, and fill their minds with lewd ideas, so it was possible for her to manipulate them to a limited degree. As for Izuku, his body was somehow rejecting her to the point that it took all of her effort to just immobilize his body to prevent him from struggling or calling out for help. Suddenly, she heard a loud mental yell which she immediately recognized, Ochako-chan Tyu-chan. As soon as she heard the mental yell, both of her female hosts started to twitch against her will. Realizing that she somehow losing control over them, Brainjacker mentally yelled back, "Don't you dare F with me." She then pushed her brain-jacking abilities to the limit. Back to the Mindscape, Izuku blinked owlishly as he stared at the scene before him. What? A small malnourished girl with pink hair was being beaten by a woman whom Izuku somehow instinctively realized was her aunt. As for why the girl was being beaten, she recently discovered that her aunt had been cheating on her husband with another man. Needless to say, her aunt refused to allow the affair to be revealed to anyone, and she was abusing the girl to keep her quiet. Speaking of the aunt, the girl's loving mother and father had died in a tragic accident years before the beating took place. No one on her father's side of the family wanted to take the orphan girl in, as her mother was actually a former 𝗧𝗵𝗲 before she got married to her husband, who was a pro-hero responsible for freeing her from her ill fate. As for her mother's side of the family, none of them ever tried to reach out to her or even her mother. In the end, the girl was adopted by her aunt, who was her father's sister, and her husband. Both her aunt and uncle made no secret that they did not care about her and saw her as little more than a burden to tolerate. The fact that the girl seemed quirkless in spite of her unusual hair coloration only made the emotional neglect and abuse worse. Even her peers, including her younger cousins, treated her with disdain due to her parentage and quirklessness. Even though Izuku knew that what he was seeing was just a memory, he still felt angry at his own inability to somehow stop the abuse. He also could not help but think about his own past suffering as a quirkless boy who was bullied and mocked by his own peers, including his former childhood friend, Bakugo Katsuki. Suddenly, a horrific sound was heard as the girl's ribs broke and punctured her lungs due to her aunt kicking her ribs repeatedly. She then started to cough out large mouthfuls of blood from her mouth. Her aunt seemed horrified by what she had done and did not know what to do. However, just as the girl was about to die due to blood loss, her consciousness was somehow transferred into her blood, which changed into a pink slime. The slime then clung onto the woman's leg and quickly made its way up to her ear. Not surprisingly, the woman panicked and tried to get it off, but to no avail. When the slime entered her ear, her struggles and screams ceased suddenly as it took over her body. The slime, Brainjacker, soon realized just how much of a callous hypocrite her aunt really was. As it turned out, Brainjacker's aunt not only cheated on her husband but even considered him as nothing more than a mere source of income for her. What was more, she enjoyed being a complete slut who would have sex with multiple men, and yet she had the sheer gall to claim that her own brother had brought dishonor to the family's reputation in spite of being a hero by marrying a former 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Brainjacker's cruel aunt was not even remorseful over the fact that she had essentially beaten her own niece to death, but was instead mainly worried about how her niece's death would affect her reputation among both her family members and her own peers who also enjoyed cheating on their husbands. Outraged by her aunt's hypocritical and uncaring nature, Brainjacker forced her aunt to reveal all records of her perverse acts on the internet and even made her reveal the names of the men she had sex with and her peers who also enjoyed cheating on their husbands. She then forced her aunt to tie herself onto the bed naked after writing vulgar words such as public cum dump and loose pee-pee sleeve around her womanhood. Once the vengeful deeds were done, Brainjacker exited her body and abandoned her to suffer the consequences. Alone in a world which she was convinced did not care for her due to her parentage, Brainjacker decided to live for herself even if it meant becoming a villainess who would harm or corrupt others. For the next few years, Brainjacker took over the bodies of various women to survive as a brain-jacking parasite, including housewives, high school girls, prostitutes, villainesses, and even a low-ranking pro-heroine. In spite of being a self-serving villainess, as well as an undeniable pleasure-seeking pervert due to her memory-reading abilities, she never forced anyone to do something which they truly refused to do unless she felt that they deserved it, like her cruel aunt. In fact, she actually protected a few of her hosts from actual rapists by forcefully immobilizing their bodies with her copies, helped a few women realize that their husbands or boyfriends were cheating on them, and even helped some women become more honest towards their husbands or lovers. In theory, she could simply take over one host and stay within that host for the rest of her life. However, she never did that, as she either felt no real emotional connection with her host or was too afraid to let go of her control over her host to be truly connected. As a result, she had been alone from the day her family died in the accident up to the present day and had never felt any true happiness in spite of being a pleasure-seeking villainess. That's just horrible. Izuku turned around and saw Ochako and 𝗬𝗪 behind him, who both wore horrified expressions on their faces. Tears streamed down their faces as they realized just how much brainjacker, who was actually supposed to be a girl as old as they were, had suffered. You three saw everything, didn't you? Izuku, Ochako, and 𝗬𝗪 turned to face brainjacker, who was currently in the form of her 13-year-old self before she died and became a slime. She glared at them with tear-filled eyes as she growled at them, "Don't even think that I'll let you three go after what you have done. By the time I'm done with your three, you'll all be nothing more than mind-broken toys." Realizing what he must do, Izuku stepped forward towards her with a determined expression on his face. Shocked by the boy's action, brainjacker stepped back and asked, "What the hell are you doing, you demon freak?" As Izuku continued to move towards her, the villainess yelled, "Stay back, if mean it." Suddenly, pink tentacles emerged from around her and lashed out at Izuku in an attempt to keep him away from her. However, her attack did not hit him, as the tentacles seemed to phase through him like intangible phantoms. Shock was apparent on her face as she tried to strike down Izuku again, only for her attack to pass through him harmlessly. Her shock turned into a mixture of panic and anger as the tentacles attacked Izuku repeatedly without any success. Frustrated by her ineffective attacks, the brainjacker resorted to insulting Izuku as she closed her eyes shut and yelled, "You think you can beat me and win the day? You're nothing more than a limp-dicked loser of a hero wannabe. You're the kind of worthless piece of SHT who'll get cucked the moment those two girls realize just how much of a whiny bitch you really are. I bet even your mom thinks you're failure in the making. So stop wasting everyone's time and just leave me the alone." When Izuku stood before brainjacker, she opened her eyes and looked up to see his kind, sympathetic eyes. Unable to comprehend the sight, she asked, Why aren't you angry at me or looking at me like I'm trash?" She then limply fell to her knees and tears flowed down her cheeks as she continued to ask, "Why do you even bother to care about me?" Izuku knelt down to her eye level and said, "That's because it's a hero's duty to save people, even if it means getting involved into things that should have nothing to do with him." He then reached out to hug her as he continued to speak, "So please, let me save you because I am here." Realizing that Izuku sincerely wanted to help her, and realizing why her attacks could not even touch him, brainjacker gave in to her longing to be finally accepted by someone and cried. Before long, both Ochako and 𝗬𝗪 hugged them as well, and all four teenagers cried together as their memories became open to one another back in the physical world. Izuku opened his eyes and looked at both Ochako and 𝗬𝗪. They both looked exhausted and had tear stains on their faces. Considering his own exhaustion, Izuku was quite certain he looked the same as them at the moment. He wore a tired smile and said, "This wasn't what I expected when I thought about spending my first night here." Ochako snorted and chuckled weakly as she replied, "Me neither, Deku. So do either of you want to go back to your rooms or stay here?" asked 𝗬𝗪. "Staying here sounds pretty good at the moment," said Izuku, who was too mentally and emotionally drained to care about what would happen the next day. All he wanted to do was rest, and he would rather rest in the arms of people whom he knew cared about him than be alone. Ochako nodded her head in agreement with Izuku and said, "I'd like to stay here too." "Well, feel free to make yourselves comfortable," said 𝗬𝗪, who tiredly nuzzled into Izuku's chest. In spite of his exhaustion, Izuku knew that sleeping on the bare floor was not a good idea, so he got up and wordlessly beckoned Ochako and 𝗬𝗪 to get into bed with him. Both girls did not protest as they got up to join him in bed. Izuku idly noted Ochako's sweaty naked body as she got onto 𝗬𝗪's bed. Feeling uncomfortably hot in his own sweaty clothes, Izuku decided to take them off, including his All Might-themed underwear. Before long, all three teenagers were on the bed and, feeling comfortable in the arms of two girls who truly loved him and with the villainous, brain-jacking slime girl residing in their heads, Izuku smiled and tiredly said, "Good night, everyone." The following morning Izuku drowsily opened his eyes and soon realized that he was indeed in Tsuyu's room with both Ochako and Tsuyu embracing him in their sleep. Smiling affectionately at the two naked girls, Izuku was about to allow himself to go back to sleep when he noticed that the door into Tsuyu's room was open. As soon as Izuku realized that the door was open, his eyes grew to the size of dinner plates as he slowly turned his attention towards it in fearful anticipation. Just as he had feared, the door was not only open but was occupied by the girls of his class, Class 1A, who were all staring at him, Tsuyu and Ochako. All of the girls, other than a certain invisible girl who was wearing clothes that showed her a fairly curvaceous slender body known as 𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻, had obvious blushes on their shocked or gaping expressions. Izuku's face flushed brightly enough to be mistaken for a firefighter siren as he desperately tried to find a suitable answer to explain the situation he was currently in. However, all that came out of his lips were half-chalked stutters. Awakened by his stuttering, Ochako sleepily woke up and asked, "Deku, what's wrong?" As sleepy as she was, Ochako did not notice that the door into Tsuyu's room was opened, nor did she notice that her female classmates were staring at her. She also sleepily mistook Izuku's choked stuttering as merely the result of him realizing that they were all naked in the same bed. Blissfully unaware that she was being watched, Ochako smiled affectionately at Izuku and nuzzled into his chest as she spoke to him. "Deku, it's okay. Yesterday wasn't a dream. We all love you. That's not what I'm worried about." Confused and feeling more awake, Ochako blinked at Izuku before turning her attention towards the door and realizing what got Izuku so worked up. As soon as Ochako saw her female classmates staring at her, Izuku and Tsuyu, her face flushed red before she buried her face into Izuku's bare chest to stifle her scream. Tsuyu, who woke up roughly at the same time as Ochako, simply blushed in embarrassment before closing her eyes and suddenly disappearing by making her own body match the colors of her surroundings. As for Brainjacker, whose real name was Yamanaka Sumimo, she wisely decided not to do anything other than mentally apologizing to her three hosts. Sorry about this. Later that day, Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu were all standing before a mouse-like quirked animal named Nedu, who was also the principal of 𝐸 High School. Standing on either side of the principal were Yagi Tashinori, a skeletal blonde man with blue eyes who was the retired #1 pro hero, All Might, himself, and Aizawa Shoyuta, a scruffy-looking pale-skinned man with dark hair who was also a pro hero known as Eraserhead. Nedu formed a tent with his paw-like hands and asked, "So, care to tell us about what has happened back at the dorm?" All three students were blushing in embarrassment as Izuku replied, "Well, Ochako-chan and Tsuyu-chan invited me to their bedroom last night to confess their feelings towards me, and we spent the rest of the night sleeping while naked." Nedu nodded in response and said, "And did any of you have any intercourse last night?" All three students shook their head in unison as Izuku replied, "And no, we didn't. I mean, we did cuddle while naked, but we didn't to that." "So tell me, Uraraka-san, why did you and Azui-san suddenly decide to hug Izuku while naked?" asked Nedu. Ochako looked downwards as she bashfully replied, "Tsuyu-chan and I both like Deku and we almost lost him back at the training camp, so..." Nedu raised his paw to stop Ochako and then said, "You answer, while perfectly understandable given recent incidents, is not the answer that I need to hear." All three students were surprised for a moment before they realized what they were talking about. Their feelings of embarrassment and shame evaporated as Tsuyu asked, "Do you know about what really happened to us?" Shoyuta stepped forward and explained, "Given recent incidents, including the summer camp attack which should not have happened, we have been increasing our surveillance and security to prevent any possible information leak which could be used by malicious villains. While I will not explain how we managed to find out that something was wrong, we did manage to uncover the fact that something less than normal had happened to all three of you yesterday night, even after considering recent events." His stern expression hardened into a glare as he asked, "Therefore, the important question is, what really happened to you three yesterday?" Izuku, Tsuyu and Ochako looked at one another and nodded in agreement before the boy spoke. "Principal Nedu, Aizawa-san, do the two of you know about All Might's connection with me?" 𝐒𝐬𝐽 raised an eyebrow in surprise while Nedu nodded and said, "Yes, I do." Although Izawa-san has not been informed about the connection, he can be trusted as both your homeroom teacher and as a pro hero. The mouse-like principal then turned his attention towards Toshinori, who nodded his head in agreement before he turned his attention back towards Izuku to ask, "So tell us, what does your connection with All Might have anything to do with?" The principal and two teachers wore shocked expressions on their faces as pink slime started to ooze from the three students' ears into their waiting hands. Before long, each student held onto a small ball of pink slime which had simple black eye spots on its face. Izuku then explained about what had happened last evening. One explanation later, Nedu took a sip of tea and sighed as he carefully contemplated over what Izuku had revealed to him, Toshinori and 𝗏𝗏𝗏. While the quirked animal was in deep thought, 𝗏𝗏𝗏 spoke to him, "Principal Nedu, I would like to have your permission to take out a bottle of strong sake from your hidden collection and, pardon my language, take a goddamn drink. This bloody mess is almost as bad as the worst-case scenario I have been fearing." Well aware that 𝗏𝗏𝗏 was having a massive headache from both the revelation of the brainjacking 𝗬𝗵𝗲, whom all three students wished to protect in spite of being a villainous no less, and Izuku being All Might's successor as the ninth holder of One for All, Nedu smiled sympathetically to him and said, "All right, you can have one bottle. Just leave the best ones at the back alone." 𝗏𝗏𝗏 nodded to Nedu before making his way to Nedu's hidden stash of alcoholic drinks which were kept inside a concealed fridge. Nedu then turned his attention towards Toshinori and said, "I know that you can't take alcohol, All Might, but I do have some cold tea if you're interested to have some." Toshinori smiled at Nedu and replied, "That won't be necessary." It was apparent that Toshinori took the news better than 𝗏𝗏𝗏. Considering that Izuku had once again proven himself to be a worthy successor of One for All, Toshinori had no reason to be as exasperated by the whole affair as 𝗏𝗏𝗏, who was already wondering if he should retire at that point to avoid the stress of being Izuku's homeroom teacher. As for why the principal and two teachers had no reason to doubt Izuku or the two girls, there were a few reasons. For one thing, no brainwashing villainess in her right mind would allow any of the three students to reveal her identity and abilities unless the said villainess wanted to stop being a villain. Another reason was that Izuku had managed to overcome brainwashing before during the sports festival, so the idea of him overcoming a different kind of brainwashing from an actual villain was certainly possible. Arguably the most compelling piece of evidence was the simple fact that Izuku had actually talked to Nana in his Mindscape before attempting to break free from the ex-villainous brainwashing. No villainous liar in his right mind would make up such an unbelievable story even after considering the possibility of the liar knowing that Izuku is a ninth holder of One for All. In addition, considering that Toshinori had not told Izuku much about Nana, Izuku's description of her and his knowledge about her tragic family circumstances were simply too accurate to be mere lucky guesses. Izuku made an effort to ignore 𝗏𝗏𝗏, who was drinking sake straight from the bottle, as he nervously asked, "So what will happen to all four of us?" Under normal circumstances, we would have to capture the villainess who has made the three of you act inappropriately on school grounds and then send her to the police to receive her punishment. However, given recent revelations, I am inclined to agree with you that simply sending her to police to be punished is not the correct answer to dealing with her, replied Nedu, who then added, "That said, doing nothing about having her in all three of your heads is far from an ideal response to her attempt at villainy, especially in the eyes of the public if they ever find out about it. Therefore, I would like to have all three of you come back to see me, Izawa-san and Toshinori-san, later today after I have decided on the best course of action to deal with not only her but you three as well." Understanding the fairness and logic in Nedu's response, Izuku bowed and replied, "Thank you very much, Nedu-sensei." Nedu smiled reassuringly at the three students and the three copies of the brain-jacking slime girl before he said, "Before I dismiss all of you, please make sure that no one else find out about what has actually happened to the three of you or about Yamanaka-san. We do not need anyone panicking about a brain-jacking slime girl being present on school grounds or having another victim of her brain-jacking." Izuku, Ochako, and Tu chuckled sheepishly in agreement before allowing the three copies of 𝗬𝗏𝗏 return into their respective heads. After each of them had a copy of 𝗬𝗏𝗏 in their heads, the three students respectfully excused themselves and left the principal's office. After the three students had left, Toshinori turned his attention to Nedu and asked, "What exactly are you planning to do about Yamanaka Shoujo, Nedu?" Nedu had a near-malevolent gleam in his beady eyes as he chuckled and replied, "Well, given the fact that we have an ex-Villainous who has brainwashing abilities and sincerely wants to stay with Midoriya-san, Uraraka-san and Azui-san, I have a few ideas." Toshinori and even the apparently tipsy Shoyuta gulped in response to Nedu's reply. A short while later in Class 1A originally, Class 1A was supposed to have a special training session to help the students develop their finishing moves. However, given the incident at the dorms, the special class was postponed to the following day. While a certain boy with spiky blonde hair and sharp red eyes named Bakugo Katsuki was angry about the postponement and blamed Izuku for it, most were shocked that Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu were involved in such a scandalous situation. Although basically everyone in Class 1A knew that Ochako and Izuku had feelings for each other, none of them expected the two to actually sleep together while naked, and with another naked girl no less. Among the four girls who saw the three in Tsuyu's room, a tall girl with a mature physique and long hair tied into a ponytail named Yaoyorozu Momo was the most appalled by what she had seen. Given her background as a sheltered girl from a rich family, it was understandable why she found the scene so scandalous. Jiraikyuka, a slender and petite girl with lazy-looking eyes, short hair and plug-like earphone jacks hanging from her earlobes, was also appalled by what she had seen, albeit to a lesser degree. Unlike Jiru and Momo, both Toru and Ishido Mina, a pink-skinned girl with pink fluffy hair, a pair of yellow horns on her head and eyes with black sclera and yellow irises, were thrilled to have witnessed such romance from their three classmates. Needless to say, the two of them planned to demand answers from Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu as soon as they possibly could. As for the boys, a few of them were angry at Izuku for being so lucky. Among them were Mineta Minoru, a blonde boy with slanted triangular eyes named Kaminari Denki, and a boy with black hair, almond-shaped eyes and large straight teeth named Sirohanta. Ida Tenya, a boy with short dark blue hair, square-shaped eyes and large calves with engine exhaust pipes protruding from them, was shocked that Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu would do something so immoral and was determined to chastise them for their actions. Todoroki Shudo, a boy with a burn scar on the left side of his face, a turquoise blue left eye and a dark gray right eye and hair that is split between crimson red on the left side and white on the right side, was surprised that Izuku was able to get into bed with two naked girls and was curious about how in the world he had managed to accomplish such a feat. Shudo's curiosity was shared by many of the other boys in the class, including Kirishima Ijuru, who had red eyes, spiky hair that is, dyed red and pointed teeth, and Ojiro Mashireo, who had short blonde hair, thin eyes and a long thick tail with a hairy tip. Not surprisingly, as soon as Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu returned into the classroom, Mina and Toru quickly took Ochako and Tsuyu away for interrogative questioning, while Mineta, Denki and Hanta took Izuku away for similar reasons. At Ochako's and Tsuyu's corner, "All right, you two, start talking," said Mina, who had a cheeky grin on her face. Although both Ochako and Tsuyu blushed in embarrassment, Tsuyu was more composed than Ochako, who was nervous and panicky and thus replied bluntly, "Ochako-chan and I both love Aizu-chan and we both wanted to tell him our feelings before something bad happens to him." Mina, along with the three other girls who were interrogating Ochako and Tsuyu, quickly realized that both Ochako and Tsuyu were actually serious about their relationship with Izuku. Given Izuku's injuries from his fight with Muscular, it was easy to understand why Ochako and Tsuyu would want to confess their feelings towards him before it was too late. Also, the four girls knew that both Ochako and Tsuyu cared about Izuku, although they did not expect Tsuyu to have the same feelings towards Izuku as Ochako, who was more obviously in love towards him. Nevertheless, Momo had to argue, "While I'm sure all of us can understand the reasoning behind your desires to express your true feelings to Midoriya-san, I still fail to understand why you both decided to go about it in such an improper way." The blushes on Ochako and Tsuyu's faces deepened as both girls seemed unsure on how to respond to Momo's admittedly logical argument. Spending a night sleeping together was one thing, but doing so while naked was another matter altogether. Fortunately, a certain slime girl named Sumimo suggested an answer to Tsuyu, who then said, To be perfectly honest, I also felt guilty about being too cowardly to help Izuku-chan save Bakugo from the villains and telling him that breaking the rules would make him no better than a villain. Tsuyu allowed 𝗬𝗵𝗲 to influence her emotions to show remorse on her normally blank face as she added, "The last thing I wanted was him assuming that I do not want to be with him anymore because he broke the rules." The frog girl then turned her attention towards Momo to say, "I also want to apologize to you and the others who went with Izu-chan to save Bakugo." Momo, who went together with Izuku, Ida, Shudo and Ijuru to rescue Katsuki, smiled at Tsuyu and said, "You don't have to apologize, Azui-san. We all knew that what we were doing wasn't in accordance to the rules even if we felt that it was the right course of action to take." Jirou on the other hand noted something and said, "Say, Tsuyu-chan, how come you're not calling Bakugo the way you normally do?" Jirou, like many of her peers, knew that Tsuyu normally referred to Katsuki as Bakugo-chan. Both Tsuyu and Ochako wore similar scowls as Ochako replied in Tsuyu's behalf, "Let's just say that Izuku told us things he normally wouldn't tell anyone about and leave it at that." Mina, Toru, Jirou and Momo were shocked by the response. Deciding against pressing the two girls for answers concerning Katsuki, the four other girls decided to ask them about other questions such as how the two of them came to care for Izuku at Izuku's corner. "Okay Midoriya, spill it," demanded Minoru. "Spill what?" asked Izuku, who was intimidated by the downright viciously bestial glares he was receiving from Minoru, Denki and Hanta. "Don't play dumb with us, you DMN playboy. How the hell did you manage to get into bed with Uraraka-chan and Azui-chan, naked?" yelled Minoru. "That's right, how the hell did you manage to get two girls to agree with the idea of sharing you?" yelled Denki. Izuku was sweating bullets as he desperately tried to explain, I didn't do anything." He then recalled the time when he shared his memories with Ochako, Tsuyu and 𝗬𝗵𝗲, which included memories of Ochako and Tsuyu developing romantic feelings towards him due to his kind and heroic actions, and thus added, "At least nothing related to dating or seducing them." "That doesn't answer how the hell you managed to get two girlfriends at the same time, you lucky bastard," argued Hanta. Suddenly, Tenya approached the group and said, "That's not the issue here." He then pointed accusingly at Izuku and said, "Midoriya-san, while I am not one to criticize you for getting more than one girl to develop romantic feelings towards you, I simply cannot approve of the three of you acting inappropriately on school grounds, including the dorms." Tenya's arms moved about in a comically robotic manner as he added, "Not only will your less than moral actions affect your reputation as a future hero, it will also affect the reputation of not only Uraraka-san and Azui-san but also the rest of us." "Who the F cares about reputation?" yelled Minoru, who then pointed at Izuku as he argued with Tenya, "I want to know his secret to getting a harem of hot babes." Suddenly, Shudo sighed wearily and quickly froze Minoru, Denki, Hanta and even Tenya in blocks of ice which reached up to their waists with his quirk before saying, "Midoriya, the next time you decide to do anything with Uraraka-san and Azui-san, please do so discreetly. I do not think Aizawa-sensei will appreciate having you three doing 𝗧𝗪𝗏 on school grounds, again." 𝗧𝗪𝗏 exclaimed Izuku. Shudo raised an eyebrow and asked, "Wait, you three haven't done it yet?" No, we didn't," replied Izuku. As he knew better than to spill the beans about 𝗬𝗪𝗏, Izuku instead explained, "I mean, we did end up sleeping together in bed naked but we didn't have sex yesterday. We only talked about how Ochako-chan and Tsuyu-chan ended up falling in love with me and why I never thought the both of them would feel that way about me in spite of my attraction towards them." All the boys, except for the decidedly irritated Katsuki, stared at Izuku and blinked a few times before Shudo spoke to Izuku with a deadpan expression on his face, "Midoriya, you have got to be, and I'm borrowing a quote from Snipe-sensei here, the purest son of a gun I have ever met." Izuku's face was practically glowing red in embarrassment as he replied, "To be fair, we did talk a lot about ourselves, including things I never thought the three of us would end up sharing." In spite of himself, Katsuki could not help but flinch ever so slightly at the mere implications of Izuku's statement as the green-eyed boy continued to speak. "It was a lot more exhausting than many of you might think and we decided to just sleep together instead of returning to our rooms after that. So basically, the three of you did nothing other than talk and cuddle in bed while naked, right? Asked Ijuru. Izuku could only nod in response. Apparently satisfied with Izuku's explanation, Kshido used the fire half of his quirk to free Minoru, Denki, Hanta and Tenya. He then said to Izuku, "Midoriya, the next time you decide to do something which is not RDC in nature, please make sure to wear some clothes or at least keep the door locked. It's a miracle that Aizawa-sensei has not decided to expel you three yet." "I'll keep that in mind," said Izuku, who scratched the back of his head sheepishly. School lessons soon resumed as normal for the rest of the day. Later that day, Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu were back in Nezu's office to hear the principal's decision. All three of them, as well as the 3 copies of 𝗬𝗵𝗲 inside their heads, were tense as they dreaded the possible bad outcomes that they might have to face. The fact that Toshinori was avoiding their gaze and was looking away with a blush on his face while Shoyuta was glaring daggers at Nezu did little to comfort them. Not minding the glare from Shoyuta, or the nervousness felt by Izuku, Ochako, Tsuyu and 𝗬𝗵𝗲, Nezu smiled cordially and said, "After much deliberation, I have decided to allow Yamanaka-san to continue living with you three on probation." Izuku, Ochako, Tsuyu and 𝗬𝗵𝗲 were obviously relieved when Nezu suddenly smirked and added, "Provided that all of you agree to brainjack the rest of your female classmates, the female students of Class 1B and any other young woman whom you may wish to add to Midoriya-san's personal harem." A moment of shocked silence passed before Izuku asked, "And Nezu-sensei, could you please repeat that? I could have sworn that you're basically telling us to let 𝗬𝗵𝗲-chan brainjack all the girls in my class, the girls in Class 1B and any other girl or young woman whom I'm interested in, including teachers like Midnight-sensei, to form my own personal harem." Nezu nodded and confirmed, "That is exactly what I have said, Midoriya-san." "May we know why you're telling us to do that of all things?" asked Ochako. Both Izuku and Tsuyu nodded their heads in vehement agreement with her. "I could tell you all the reason for me to suggest such a thing, but I think that it is best to keep that under a need-to-know basis. After all, you can never tell who might conveniently overhear our discussion and let this wild pee-pee cat out of the bag like the last time it happened," replied Nezu. Realization suddenly struck all 3 students and they were about to speak when Nezu silenced them with a raised paw and said, "Now, I understand that forcing you 3 to form Midoriya-san's personal harem is indeed a daunting task, especially considering that all of those lovely ladies must have their own lives to live and their own desires to fulfill. However, I do believe that you have what it takes to convince at least some of them to willingly join his harem and form one of the greatest hero teams the world has ever known." Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu looked at one another for a moment before they all turned their attention towards Nezu. Izuku then said, "All right, we'll try to do as you have asked, Nezu-sensei. However, we will not force anyone to join the harem nor try to steal anyone's girlfriend. Also, all of 𝗬𝗵𝗲-chan's hosts will be informed that this is your idea. If we somehow find someone whom we refuse to have in the harem or is acting against me and my harem, we will let you know about it." Nezu clapped his paws happily and replied, "Excellent, I'm sure you will be able to form a closer bond with your female schoolmates if nothing else. You are all free to leave and enjoy the rest of the day by yourselves before executing your harem plan." Before Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu left, Nezu added, "By the way, please go to Recovery Girl's office to receive the necessary safety equipment for the harem plan to prevent any accidents from happening. I will also be assigning Kayama Namuri to keep an eye on you. You all understand why she is the best suited to keep an eye on you." Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu blushed at the idea that they would be monitored by Kayama Namuri, a curvaceous woman with sky-blue eyes and long spiky hair who is also a DMNTRX-themed pro-heroine named Midnight, before they hastily left the office. They also easily figured out that the necessary safety equipment, which Nezu had mentioned, would most likely be contraceptives such as condoms and intrauterine devices IUDs. They could only hope that Recovery Girl, a short, elderly woman whose real name was Shizenji Chiyo, would not scold or tease them too much for needing them. After they left the office, Shoyuta glared at Nezu and asked, "Are you absolutely certain that this insane plan of yours is going to work? If this plan fails and the public finds out about it, the people's faith in heroes may very well break beyond any hope of repair." Nedu sighed and replied, I am well aware of the possible negative scenarios, Izawa-san. However, given the fact that the League of Villains have somehow managed to attack the students during the summer camp, we cannot ignore the possibility that their spy could very well be one of our own students. Yamanaka-san's memory reading ability, which extends to reading the separate memories of split personalities, will allow us to at least confirm if any of the female students and teachers are truly innocent or not. Even you cannot disagree with my fears of the possibility of sleeper agents as opposed to normal spies. And what about the fact that you're essentially using them and any other girl who agrees to be in Midoriya's harem as bait for the League of Villains to target through their spy? Asked Shoyuta, who then added, can we even trust that slime girl to not turn against us? I admit that this is indeed a risky gamble, but I'm sure that I'm not the only one who is willing to have faith in Midoriya-san's ability to guide Yamanaka-san to the right path, replied Nedu, who then turned his attention towards Toshinori and asked, isn't that right, Yagi-san? Toshinori smiled in spite of knowing Nezu's idea and said, indeed, Nezu-san. If there is anyone who could make her give up her villainy in spite of us basically giving her permission to brainjack more victims, it would be him. Shoyuta realized that he could not convince Nedu to change his mind and sighed wearily before he said, I just hope that your plan will not bit us in the butt. Back to Izuku, Ochako, 𝗬𝗪 and 𝗬𝗵𝗲. Izuku and his harem of Ochako, 𝗬𝗪 and 𝗬𝗵𝗲 were in 𝗬𝗪's room, again, to mentally discuss about Nezu's plan in their shared mindscape. Before they began the discussion, they made sure to lock the door, close the curtains, and even have 𝗬𝗪 keep an eye on the door in case anyone tried to break into her room. Tentacles of pink slime could be seen linking Izuku to Ochako and 𝗬𝗪 as they all mentally discussed about it. So we all agree that Nedu thinks that at least one of the teachers or students is a spy for the League of Villains, and he wants us to at least confirm if any of the girls in Class 1A and Class 1B is the spy, said Izuku. As much as I don't want to believe it, we can't say for certain that none of them is the spy, said Ochako. While I share Ochako-chan's belief that they can't possibly be villains, we can't ignore the possibility of one of them being forced to help the villains or being brainwashed into their sleeper agent, said 𝗬𝗪. There's also the possibility of the girls carrying a tracking beacon for the League of Villains to track without even realizing it, said 𝗬𝗪𝗲, who then added, I might be able to detect mental anomalies caused by brainwashing since I have brainjacked a woman with multiple personalities before, but even I can't do much about someone carrying a tracking beacon without realizing it. Izuku had a determined look on his face as he spoke, we will have to try regardless. If nothing else, we can at the very least confirm that the girls are innocent and Nezu-sensei will be able to focus his attention towards other possible leads to the spy. With any luck, our combined efforts will be able to prevent another villain attack from happening to us. But will it really happen anytime soon? Asked 𝗬𝗪𝗲, who then added, from what you have shared with us, that villain, All For One, is the true leader of the League of Villains and is currently imprisoned in Tartarus thanks to All Might. That may be true, but Shigaraki is still out there and I'm sure he will attack us at the soonest opportunity he has. It's only a matter of when he will attack and how he will go about it. We need to be prepared for that day, and stopping him from getting any more information about us will definitely help, replied Izuku. Unable to deny Izuku's logical argument, Ochako, 𝗬𝗪 and 𝗬𝗪𝗲 nodded in agreement with him. 𝗬𝗪𝗲 cheekily spoke, speaking about finding spies and stopping villains, I hope you three have not forgotten what I'm allowed to do. You seem awfully happy about it, said 𝗬𝗪, who was understandably worried about 𝗬𝗪𝗲's eagerness to brainjack more girls. Don't get me wrong, I do want to stay with you three, but I'd be lying if I say that I'm not interested in making Izuku's harem a reality, replied 𝗬𝗪𝗲, who then added, up until recently, I was a pleasure-seeking villainess with brain-jacking abilities after all. True, but that can't be the only reason, can it? Asked Ochako. Let's just say that I managed to discover a few nifty features which Izuku has that I'm sure you two girls will love to experience before we get this harem plan started, answered 𝗬𝗪𝗲. Izuku, Ochako, and 𝗬𝗪 all wore bright blushes as they could easily guess that whatever 𝗬𝗪𝗲 had discovered about Izuku would be related to lustful SXL-NT artists. They could only hope that they would be able to avoid becoming hedonistic perverts by the time they complete the harem plan. Boku no Hero Academia, Izuku's harem academia disclaimer. This is a mature-rated fanfiction story of Boku no Hero Academia that I am writing for RDC Fun. Needless to say, this story is AU. The characters may seem OOC to some and there will be smutty lemons. Also, I own nothing of the series other than the fanfiction stories that I make. Editing notes. This story has undergone a minor edit for grammar and naming errors. Only the archive of our own website has the edited chapters, as I can only use the mobile app version of the fanfiction.net website, which is more troublesome to post new and edited chapters. Chapter 2. 𝗏𝗧𝗏 and 𝗧𝗏 Izuku, 𝗏𝗧𝗏, 𝗧𝗏 and 𝗵𝗵𝗲 were still in the Mindscape when 𝗏𝗧𝗏 asked, "So what exactly are Deku's nifty features?" 𝗵𝗵𝗲, who appeared as her original human self in the Mindscape, albeit altered to be at the same age as the other three, grinned mischievously and said, "Rather than tell you, I'd rather let you three discover it for yourselves." "Wait, you're not telling us to have you, are you?" asked 𝗬𝗏. "I sure as hell am," replied 𝗵𝗵𝗲, who then added, "Why else do you think Nedu-san told us to get those contraceptives from Recovery Girl? I even went through the trouble of getting you girls to take the IUDs so that you can enjoy raw section. Trust me, it feels a whole lot better than SEC with the condom on." Both 𝗏𝗧𝗏 and 𝗬𝗏 blushed as they recalled what had happened earlier that day. Start a flashback. Izuku, 𝗏𝗧𝗏, 𝗬𝗏 and 𝗵𝗵𝗲 were in Recovery Girl's school clinic after being dismissed by Nedu. The elderly lady glared at them like a disapproving grandmother as she muttered, "Not even a month after the summer camp attack and the Kamino incident and you three end up getting attacked by a villain again." To be perfectly fair, 𝗵𝗵𝗲-chan has nothing to do with the League of Villains and she actually wants to stop being a villain, replied Izuku, who had a sheepish grin on his face. Recovery Girl whacked Izuku's shin with her walking stick in response and replied, "That does not change the fact that you three and that slime girl are now involved in Nezu's hair-brain scheme, which by the way I simply do not approve." While Izuku hopped away and nursed his injured shin, Recovery Girl sighed and said, "Anyway, I do have a number of contraceptives for you three to use to prevent any unwanted pregnancies." She then took out a number of condoms, IUDs and BRTH prevention pills. Suddenly, 𝗵𝗵𝗲 brain-jacked 𝗏𝗧𝗏 and said, "Please give us the IUDs and condoms." Surprised, 𝗬𝗏 asked the brain-jacked 𝗏𝗧𝗏 𝗏𝗏𝗏, "Why those two, Karo?" Unlike Recovery Girl, 𝗬𝗏 and Izuku could instinctively tell that 𝗵𝗵𝗲 had taken over 𝗏𝗧𝗏's body due to having copies of her inside their own heads. It should also be made clear that 𝗵𝗵𝗲 was still one individual in spite of having multiple physical copies of herself due to a psychic connection between each copy. That said, a physical connection with her other copies was still necessary to allow her different hosts to mentally communicate with one another directly. CNTRCPTV pills give me a belly ache if you get what I mean. Plus, I know a couple of tricks to make pregnancies 100% impossible, replied 𝗏𝗏𝗏. Remembering that 𝗵𝗵𝗲 could insert a copy of herself directly into a woman's WMB to prevent pregnancies by literally feeding on SM, and 𝗬𝗏 and 𝗏𝗧𝗏 both had to admit that using IUDs together with 𝗵𝗵𝗲's copies seemed the most logical course of action. Also, having 𝗵𝗵𝗲's copies inside their wombs would ensure that the IUDs would not cause any complications. 𝗬𝗏 nodded in agreement with 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and turned her attention towards Recovery Girl to say, "We'll take the IUDs and the condoms, Karo." "All right then," said Recovery Girl, who then turned her attention towards Izuku and shooed him out of the room so that she could insert the IUDs into 𝗏𝗧𝗏 and 𝗬𝗏's wombs. As it turned out, 𝗵𝗵𝗲's slimy body was perfect for inserting the IUDs without damaging their hymens or requiring professional medical aid. That said, both 𝗏𝗧𝗏 and 𝗬𝗏 found the experience of 𝗵𝗵𝗲's copies going into their wombs uncomfortably stimulating. End of flashback. Shouldn't we at least go out for a few dates before we actually have section? We only got to really know about each other yesterday after all, protested 𝗏𝗧𝗏. 𝗵𝗵𝗲 shrugged as she argued, "Not that I'm against us going out on dates, but you have to admit that the memory sharing we did last night has left very little else for us to find out about one another." She then wore a smug grin as she added, "Plus, I know for a fact that you two want to be the first ones to connect with Izuku here. So the way I see it, you two should go ahead and do the hot and CC with him before we have to start the harem plan." Both 𝗏𝗧𝗏 and 𝗬𝗏 blushed as they could not disagree with 𝗵𝗵𝗲's statement. Izuku blushed as well, as he never thought that he would be having AC with not one but two lovely girls who actually loved him. Fine, you have made your point, 𝗬𝗵𝗲-chan. Just let us go at it slow and at our own pace, all right, said Ochako. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 nodded with an understanding smile before she replied, sure thing. No interference from me for your first time. She knew that she had almost ruined Ochako's and Tsuyu's confessions of love towards Izuku and was determined to let both girls experience SEC for the first time on their own. Besides, it would be interesting for her to know what SEC was like without controlling their bodies. Back in the physical world, Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu all blushed in embarrassment as they knew what they were about to do. Unsure what to do, in spite of having seen memories of 𝗬𝗵𝗲's many SXL acts as a brain-jacking villain, Izuku asked, so, do you want me to 𝐒𝗧𝗧𝗏 first or we do it together? I think we should eat together, replied Ochako, who was resisting the urge to hide her face behind her hands and possibly make herself float by accident. Ochako-chan should start first. She's known you for the longest and I'm willing to wait for my turn, Karo, said Tsuyu. While Ochako was thankful for Tsuyu's generosity, Izuku nodded and said, let's all 𝗧𝗧𝗏 together then. Despite the fact that all three of them had shared memories, including memories of their naked bodies, they still felt nervous about fully exposing themselves towards one another. All three of them got off the bed and took off their clothes at the same time while looking away from one another. Once Izuku had taken off all of his clothes, he asked the two girls, are you both ready to see me? As ready as I'll ever be, replied Ochako. Same here, Karo, said Tsuyu. All right, on the count of 3, we all turned around and look at one another, said Izuku, who then started to count with Ochako and Tsuyu, 1, 2, 3. When all three students turned to look at one another, they all blushed as they realized a number of things. For Izuku, he realized that Ochako's body was appealing and looked wonderfully soft to touch, while Tsuyu had firm yet sensually feminine legs and wide hips. As for Ochako and Tsuyu, they both admired Izuku's muscular body with strong defined muscles and the scars on his arms, which gave him a surprisingly rugged look in spite of his innocent-looking freckled face. They then noticed his 𝗧𝗏𝗏 and were shocked by it as Tsuyu spoke, that does not match with your face at all, Izu-chan. Unlike Izuku's innocent-looking face, his 𝗧𝗏𝗏 appeared anything but innocent. With an impressively large size of above 7 inches in length, bulging veins on its skin and partially exposed glands covered in 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏, Izuku's 𝗧𝗏𝗏phallus seemed almost out of place with the rest of him. Granted, it was not the largest PP that 𝗬𝗵𝗲 had ever seen, as she had actually encountered a man who had a literal horse-like phallus as a quirk, but Izuku's member was certainly on the larger side of the size scale. Embarrassed about his own PP, Izuku explained, I have always been embarrassed about it. Left unsaid was that, in spite of his interest in girls and his impressive gentleness, his lack of confidence due to years of being bullied for being quirkless had negatively affected his SEC drive, which meant that he masturbated less and was less exposed to pornography than most of his peers. Ochako could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at Izuku's phallus and thought to herself, there's no way that huge thing can fit into me. In spite of her fears, Ochako could not help but rub her legs together as she thought, yet I want it inside me so badly. Given the fact that Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu had been exposed to 𝗬𝗵𝗲's memories, it would make sense that they were more interested in SEC than before and had at least some idea on how good it could feel. Swallowing her own spit, Ochako approached Izuku and got onto her knees so that his phallus was right in front of her blushing face. She then looked up and said, I'm going to use my hands and maybe my mouth too to start. Let me know if you want me to stop. Izuku nodded in response and he replied, don't force yourself, Ochako-chan. Assured by Izuku's response, Ochako gently held onto his 𝗧𝗏𝗏 with both hands with her pinky fingers extended to prevent the accidental activation of her zero-gravity quirk. Izuku in response to her gentle touch, which was enhanced by the soft pads on her fingertips. Ochako blushed even more as she slowly moved her hands to, as 𝗬𝗵𝗲 would put it, pump his rock-hard pages. Both Ochako and Tsuyu were almost mesmerized as they could see the 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏 of Izuku's PP moving back and forth with Ochako's hands, which resulted in the rhythmic exposure and concealment of the deceptively soft-looking glands of Izuku's pages. Their fascination grew as clear and slimy 𝗵𝗃 started to emerge the tip of the apparently excited phallus. Filled with this XL curiosity, 𝗧𝗏𝗄 stopped moving her hands to fully expose the glands of Izuku's phallus and then used her tongue to gently lick it. Izuku shut his eyes and had to repress as his hands reached out to hold onto 𝗧𝗏𝗄's head. Although shocked by Izuku's sudden action, 𝗧𝗏𝗄 looked up and realized that Izuku was feeling immense pleasure from the lick. Feeling bolder and more excited, 𝗧𝗏𝗄 decided to continue pleasuring him with her mouth and tongue. In spite of her lack of actual SXL experience, she seemed to instinctively know how to best pleasure Izuku. Then again, she did know about 𝗬𝗵𝗲's many SXL acts, and Izuku's barely repressed gasps and moans of pleasure made it clear that he was enjoying the experience. While 𝗧𝗏𝗄 was basically kissing, licking and suckling onto the exposed glands of Izuku's pp, Tsuyu was using her tongue to essentially lick her own 𝗵𝗃 while her fingers stimulated one of her irked nipples and her equally irked 𝗂𝗟. Her eyes were half-lidded as she felt a needy ache in her 𝗵𝗵. 𝗧𝗏𝗄-chan, please hurry. I'm not sure how much longer I can bear to watch, thought Tsuyu as she knew that her frog-based quirk was making her horniness even worse. Oh 𝗧𝗏𝗄-chan, I'm about to come, cried Izuku. Hearing Izuku's warning, 𝗧𝗏𝗄 turned to Tsuyu to give her a wordless permission. All too happy to accept, Tsuyu knelt beside 𝗧𝗏𝗄 and wrapped her tongue around Izuku's pages. The frog-like girl could not help but enjoy witnessing Izuku's shocked reaction and tasting his clearly manly pp as she gently coiled her tongue around it. The tip of her tongue then rubbed against the tip of Izuku's member. Unable to hold back, Izuku yelled, "Oh 𝗧𝗏𝗄-chan, Tsuyu-chan." Like a broken dam, hot white 𝗔𝗂𝗧𝗏 gushed out from his pp onto 𝗧𝗏𝗄 and Tsuyu, covering their faces and chests in the process. Its musky scent filled the room while 𝗧𝗏𝗄 and Tsuyu touched and tasted the sticky fluid out of curious fascination. Their wombs soon started to ache even more to have their fill of Izuku's white seed. Fortunately, Izuku's irked phallus still stood proudly irked in spite of releasing such an impressive amount of seed. As 𝗬𝗵𝗲 had stated earlier, Izuku had a few nifty features which not only included his impressively large phallus but also the large amount of wonderfully thick 𝗔𝗂𝗧𝗏 which he could produce and his immense SXL stamina which had finally awakened after years of repression due to his initial lack of confidence. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 also knew that Izuku possessed keen observational skills which meant that he would be able to quickly learn the best methods to give each of his lovers intense SXL pleasure. With a little experience and control over his orgasms, he could become a natural lady killer in the bedroom. Unable to bear the ache anymore, 𝗧𝗏𝗄 leaned back and hesitantly spread her legs as she looked up at Izuku with tearful eyes. She then said, "Deku, please be gentle with me." Filled with this lust yet tempered by a deep and gentle sense of love for the girl who was offering her virginity to him, Izuku knelt down and kissed her without a care of the lingering taste of his own 𝗔𝗂𝗧𝗏 in her mouth. He then positioned himself so that his pp was touching the wet entrance of her maidenhood and said, "𝗧𝗏𝗄-chan, let me know if it hurts too much." Smiling in response to Izuku's kindness and care, 𝗧𝗏𝗄 nodded with a smile and said, "Please make me yours." The mental shackles of Izuku's doubts and fears broke as he swiftly plunged his phallus deep into 𝗧𝗏𝗄, breaking her hymn and filling her nether part with his own. 𝗧𝗏𝗄 was barely able to stop herself from screaming in pain by gritting her teeth and wrapping her arms around Izuku's neck as if her life depended on it. Blood oozed from her broken hymn and pooled onto the floor. In spite of the pain, 𝗧𝗏𝗄 felt happy as she had given herself to Izuku, to a beloved friend who would no doubt become a great man, hero, lover and husband. After what seemed to be an eternity of pain, 𝗧𝗏𝗄 said, "Deku, you can start moving now. Just be slow and gentle." Izuku smiled gently at 𝗧𝗏𝗄 in spite of his painfully throbbing member which was still inside of her and replied, "I will, 𝗧𝗏𝗄-chan." He then started to move. In spite of the initial pain and discomfort, 𝗧𝗏𝗄 slowly started to feel more and more pleasure from the feeling of Izuku's phallus moving in and out of her 𝗵𝗃. Before long, she started to move on her own to better match with his movements and feel more of him inside of her. She also wrapped her legs around Izuku's waist as if to keep him in place while her arms held onto him even more tightly to the point that her soft melons were pressing against his firm muscular chest. Driven by a growing need for release, Izuku and 𝗀𝗧𝗄 moved with increasingly frantic speed as if they were on a race against time itself. "Oh 𝗀𝗧𝗄-chan, I'm going to come again. Do it fill me with your cum." Both 𝗀𝗧𝗄 and Izuku cried out in unison as he slammed his phallus as deeply into her nether part as he could and released his seed into her very WMB. As for 𝗀𝗧𝗄, the walls of her vagina contracted and twitched as though it was trying to suck out every drop of white seed from Izuku. Needless to say, she had experienced her own orgasm and she knew that she would be hooked to the feeling if she was not careful about it. While her consciousness faded due to the effects of her 𝗧𝗵𝗲, 𝗀𝗧𝗄 could not help but admit to herself, "I wouldn't mind getting a little hooked to it though," while 𝗀𝗧𝗄 passed out with a contented smile on her face and Izuku's white seed mixed with her crimson blood leaking out of the entrance of her private part. Izuku smiled tenderly at her and lovingly stroked her face with his scarred hand. He felt joy in knowing that he had not only made love to 𝗀𝗧𝗄 but also made her first SXL experience a wonderful one. "Aizu-chan, can you make me feel good too, Karo?" Izuku turned to face 𝗬𝗪, who was actually crying due to her painful need to mate. Knowing what he must do, Izuku nodded and said, "Let me put 𝗀𝗧𝗄-chan in bed first." 𝗬𝗪 nodded in understanding and waited for Izuku to put 𝗀𝗧𝗄 onto 𝗬𝗪's bed after putting a pair of mittens onto her hands. He then covered 𝗀𝗧𝗄's naked sweaty body with a blanket so that she would not catch a cold. Once he was done, 𝗬𝗪 turned around with her legs wide apart and raised her backside towards him. She then looked over her shoulder and said, "Please F me like I'm a corny beach in heat, Karo." Shocked by 𝗬𝗪's choice of words, Izuku hesitated and asked, "You're 𝗬𝗪-chan, right?" Although he knew that 𝗬𝗵𝗲 had not brainjacked her, he had to be sure. The frog-like girl nodded and shamefully explained, "My quirk makes me want to mate with you like an animal so badly. I don't have much of my him left because of my fingers and tongue, so," realizing why 𝗬𝗪 was so desperate to have Izuku smiled as though he was about to save her from a crisis and said, "All right, I'll do my best." Knowing that 𝗬𝗪 was willing to accept 𝗓𝗃𝐶 and feeling more confident of his own SXL prowess, Izuku quickly plunged his still irked phallus deep into her twitchy and eager nether part from behind. As wet as it was, his pee-pee easily went deep into her and even touched her CRVX. While Izuku was gentle with 𝗀𝗧𝗄 until their growing desires made them almost desperate for release, he was almost bestial in lust as he furiously plunged his member into 𝗬𝗪's eager private part while his hands were placed beside her as if to pin her down. In spite of the furious rutting, there was little doubt about the love between Izuku and 𝗬𝗪. They moved with eager longing to please one another. 𝗬𝗪 threw her caution and fear into the wind as she and croaked with each wave of pleasure that she felt while her long twitching tongue hung limply from her mouth. Izuku on the other hand enjoyed every moment of the 𝗓𝗃𝐶 and knew that 𝗬𝗪 loved it as well. Before long, both Izuku and 𝗬𝗪 climaxed and the frog-like girl croaked loudly enough to almost make the glass panes of the window into her dorm room vibrate. Exhausted yet satisfied, Izuku and 𝗬𝗪 smiled at one another and kissed tenderly, which contrasted with their almost savage rutting. Mustering the last of their strength, they got up and went to bed to sleep with 𝗀𝗧𝗄. As Izuku lay between 𝗀𝗧𝗄 and 𝗬𝗪, he could feel their warm and soft yet firm bodies pressing onto him. Somehow, his pee-pee became excited in response and became irked again, but he was satisfied with his first SXL experience and thus felt disinclined to continue SXL NTR with the two clearly exhausted girls. Holding them lovingly in his arms, he swore to protect and love them for as long as they wished to continue loving him. In Izuku's Mindscape, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 had climaxed multiple times from feeling the SXL pleasure of Izuku having SEC with 𝗀𝗧𝗄 and 𝗬𝗪. Gasping for breath, in a manner of speaking anyway, she "My God, I never knew that letting go of my control over them would allow me to feel this good." Before she accepted Izuku, 𝗀𝗧𝗄 and 𝗬𝗪's friendship, she had a constant fear of losing control, which meant that she could not fully enjoy the various SXL acts that she had committed as a brain-jacking Villainous. Given the fact that she no longer had to fear losing control over the three of them, she could focus entirely on their SXL pleasure, which was a new and wonderful experience for her in spite of her past SXL acts. Needless to say, she loved every minute of it. "I so blame you for this." 𝗬𝗵𝗲 turned her attention towards Nana, who was glowering at her in spite of being practically naked and covered from head to toe in 𝗔𝗂𝐁 from multiple men. She was also gasping for breath while 𝗔𝗂𝐁 leaked from both her vagina and anus. Do you have any idea what it's like to have SEC with 6 corny men at the same time? Trust me, having SEC with 6 corny men at the same time is nothing too crazy compared to some of the weirder CRP I have experienced, replied 𝗬𝗵𝗲, who then shuddered in disgust as she added, like that time when I got into the body of a woman who had a FTSH for literal SHT. I have never felt so unclean before or ever since. Understandably, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 abandoned the coprophilic host as quickly as she could and stayed far away from her ever since. Nana almost felt sympathetic for the former Villainous and said, well, this XL shenanigans aside, I hope that this crazy plan that Nedu has planned for Izuku works out. As much as I hope that he can live a happy life with the people whom he loves, being a holder of one for all tends to make life difficult for both the user and the romantic partners. Don't worry. No matter what happens to Izuku, I will stay inside of him. I owe him at least that much for accepting me for who and what I am, replied 𝗬𝗵𝗲. Seeing the determination in 𝗬𝗵𝗲's eyes, Nana smiled in spite of her earlier aggravation and said, that's good to know, 𝗬𝗵𝗲-chan. Meanwhile, in Mina's room, which was directly below 𝗬𝗠's room, Mina, Toru, Kyoka and Momo had overheard the sounds of SXL lovemaking between Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu. All of them felt embarrassed and ashamed as their nether parts tingled with SXL excitement. Kyoka in particular was badly affected by the sounds she had overheard due to her keen sense of hearing through her ear jacks. Needless to say, she was going to need quite a bit of time alone to relieve her SXL urges. She also sneaked a peek at Momo and wished that she could ask the more curvaceous girl to help her with her SXL urges. Unknown to everyone else other than herself, Kyoka was bisexual and was sexually interested in Momo in spite of being interested in boys as well. As far as boys were concerned, Kyoka was neither sexually nor romantically interested in any of them in spite of being friends with some of them such as Denki and Kurakuji, a soft-spoken boy with a wide muscular build and a rock-like head. In fact, she tended to see them as friends of even brothers instead of possible romantic or SXL partners. Then again, considering that not even the class pervert, Minoru, was sexually interested in her, it could be said that her lack of interest in the boys of her class was partly due to her own insecurities as a girl who lacked a womanly figure. Kyoka was not the only girl who was resisting the urge to striptease until she was alone, as Momo also wanted to touch herself. As stated before, she was a sheltered rich girl who was surprisingly innocent on matters of love and 𝐸 to the point of being innocently oblivious about her own modesty or the lack of it. It could even be said that overhearing Izuku having SEC with Ochako and Tsuyu was her first real exposure to SXL activities. As a result, she was struggling with her newly awakened SXL urges, which were filling her with shamefully lewd and RDC ideas. Toru, being an invisible girl who wanted to be a hero, was already used to the idea of walking around naked yet unseen. She had even used her invisibility to spy on people on a number of occasions and had caught people making out in public before. As such, she was not only an invisible 𝗧𝗵𝗲 but also a viewer, which meant that she was determined to be a personal witness of the next time Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu had section. Mina, unlike most of the girls, had gone out on dates before. However, her dates tended to be casual and friendly as opposed to being romantic or NTMT. In fact, she had not even kissed a p. She was therefore still a virgin in spite of being the closest thing to a love expert among the girls of Class 1A and was determined to get the details on Ochako's and Tsuyu's SXL experience. Before long, all 4 girls went back to their respective rooms and started to relieve themselves of their SXL urges in different ways. While Mina and Toru simply fingered themselves to 𝗂𝗵𝗲, with the added bonus of homemade lotion, in Mina's case, as she could secret acidic fluids of varying corrosiveness and viscosity, Kyoka actually used her ear jacks as makeshift vibrators to 𝗬𝗵𝗲 herself. Considering that her ear jacks channeled the sound of her heartbeat and sounds are made through vibrations, her experience was quite intense, especially when one of her ear jacks vibrated against her 𝗂𝗪𝗔. As for Momo, She initially started with fingering herself but soon started creating simple metal rods with smooth rounded ends with her quirk to insert them into her aching nether part. Shame and pleasure consumed her as she moved the rod in and out of her vgna with increasing urgency until she finally achieved orgasm. Before all four girls passed out from climaxing, they all shared one common thought. I want to have a lover too. Elsewhere, while the four girls relieved themselves of their SXL urges, a certain curvaceous woman named Nemuri was furiously pleasuring herself with a large DLD which reached all the way to her CRVX. As she was responsible for monitoring Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu on Nezu's admittedly cryptic request, she obviously found out that the three of them had section. She also monitored the other four girls of Class 1A, which meant that she knew about their RDC activities as well. Nemuri had a look of blissful joy on her face as she climaxed and thought to herself, best assignment ever. The following day 𝗧𝗪𝐺 twitched with annoyance as he glared at Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu. While Izuku seemed mostly fine, it was obvious as both Ochako and Tsuyu were limping due to their recent activities on the day before. The fact that Izuku had not been in his room at the dorms that morning only made it more obvious that he, Ochako, and Tsuyu had slept together again. There was also the fact that Tsuyu's room practically reeked of dried sweat and SXL fluids. The irritated homeroom teacher of Class 1A was so very tempted to expel the three corny troublemakers, for the sake of preserving his own sanity. However, Nedu made it clear that Izuku and his HRM were to be exempted from punishment unless something truly terrible occurred. The fact that everyone else in Class 1A already knew that something had happened between the three of them only made 𝗧𝗪𝐺's headache worse. Momo, Kyuka, Mina, and Toru were blushing while stealing glances at the three embarrassed lovers, while Minoru, Denki, and Hanta were glaring at Izuku with obvious envy in their eyes. Katsuki was also glaring at Izuku, although it was filled with murderous rage instead of envy for some reason. As for Tenya, the ever-serious boy was acting like a malfunctioning robot as he was forced to accept the reality that Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu had had SEC in the dorms. Even 𝗧𝗪𝐺 was stealing curious glances at the three of them with a slight blush on his face. Seriously, 2 nights of staying in the dorms and I already have to deal with this SHT. You three are very, very lucky that Principal Nedu had deemed you three exempt from expulsion for your indecent actions as long as Uraraka-san and Azui-san do not get 𝗶. Had it been up to me, I would have expelled you three by now, growled 𝗧𝗪𝐺, who then added, you and your classmates are already behind schedule on developing your finishing moves. Further delays will not be tolerated and I will see to it as you three are treated as harshly as your classmates, understood? Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu stood at full attention out of fear as they replied, why yes, Aizawa-sensei. 𝗧𝗪𝐺 turned his attention towards the rest of Class 1A and said, all of you, get changed into your hero costumes and meet me at Gym Gamma. I want all of you there in less than 10 minutes, understood? It was obvious that 𝗧𝗪𝐺 was not taking no for an answer, so everyone replied in affirmative and quickly changed into their hero costumes. Understandably, any attempt to interrogate Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu would have to wait until later. Less than 10 minutes later, everyone had gathered in Gym Gamma, which was also known as the Training Dreamland. The students and teachers noted that Nemuri seemed a little sleep-deprived as she greeted them more tiredly than usual. In spite of her apparent exhaustion, she seemed to be in a very cheerful mood and even winked at Izuku. Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu blushed as they recalled that she was responsible for monitoring them and had probably seen or at least overheard their lovemaking. Before long, the teachers present in the gym explained the purpose of the training, which would help the student not only develop their finishing moves but also help them prepare for the Provisional Hero License exam. 𝗧𝗪𝐺 also explained to them that they should consult with the support department of a high school to develop suitable support gear to complement with their abilities as heroes. Are you all ready? Asked 𝗧𝗪𝐺. Needless to say, the students were more than ready in spite of having their training delayed by a day and having sore loins in the case of Ochako and Tsuyu. A short while later, Toshinori was surprised to see Izuku using grapples and kicks as he fought against a clone of a hero who was dressed in a tan cloak known as ectoplasm. When Izuku took a break, Toshinori asked, when did you come up with those moves, Midoriya Shounen? Well, Since I can't afford to damage my arms any further, I asked Ochako-chan and Tsuyu-chan for advice. All Might Sensei, replied Izuku. Left unsaid was that he saw memories of their fighting moves and knew that he should adopt them to prevent further injuries on his arms. Both Ochako and Tsuyu readily agreed with his decision to do so. Toshinori smiled in approval and said, "That's good to know, Midoriya Shounen." He was planning to tell Izuku to stop imitating him, but he realized that his advice was not necessary. Izuku nodded with a confident smile and replied, "I do want to be a great hero like you, All Might Sensei, but I now know that I can be a great hero in my own way." Toshinori resisted the urge to hug Izuku as though he was his own son. Instead, he patted his shoulder with his uninjured arm and said, "Aizawa-san may not approve of your current relationship with Uraraka Shoujo and Azui Shoujo, but I can tell that being together with them has done wonders for you." His smile became cheeky as he added, "Just don't forget that there are times for pleasurable fun and times for hard work, Midoriya Shounen." Izuku blushed in embarrassment and replied, "I'll keep that in mind, All Might Sensei." Neither of them noticed that a certain explosive blonde named Katsuki was glaring at them with anger and even envy in his eyes. Later that day, Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu somehow avoided getting interrogated by their classmates after training their finishing moves and were walking together towards the support department workshop to acquire suitable support gear. As they made their way towards the workshop, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 copy inside Izuku's head curiously asked, "Say, isn't that 𝗧𝗵𝗲 girl from the support department?" She was referring to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, a girl with a mature build, pink dreadlocks and eyes with yellow irises that resemble scope lenses. Izuku mentally replied, "Yes, she is." "So, what are the chances that she'll be making support gear for all of you?" asked 𝗬𝗵𝗲. "Honestly, I'm not too sure, but I won't be surprised if she does make out support gear," admitted Izuku. "What's wrong, Deku?" asked Ochako. She knew that Izuku was having a mental conversation with 𝗬𝗵𝗲 and was curious about what they were talking about. "Oh, I'm just wondering if we'll be meeting 𝗧𝗵𝗲-san in the workshop," said Izuku. It was clear to Ochako and Tsuyu that he was speaking a half-truth to avoid mentioning about 𝗬𝗵𝗲 in public. "You mean that girl with the support gear back at the sports festival?" asked Tsuyu. She knew that Mei was Izuku's team mate during the cavalry battle portion of the festival. "Yup," answered Izuku. Ochako pouted as she muttered, "I can't say that I'm too eager to have her making my support gear." She was still not very happy that Izuku praised Mei for her support gear during the sports festival. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 suddenly had an idea and mentally spoke to all three of her hosts at the same time. "I think we should add her in the 𝐎𝐵." Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu barely stopped themselves from falling down and landing onto their faces in unison before Ochako mentally asked, "Why in the world should we? She's not even in Class 1B. Why not? She seems pretty smart and maybe she can make some kind of gadget to help us locate any tracking beacon which our classmates or those students in Class 1B are carrying," replied 𝗬𝗵𝗲. Surprised by 𝗬𝗵𝗲's response, Ochako asked, "You're not just saying that to have another girl in the 𝐎𝐵?" 𝗬𝗵𝗲 did her best mental image of a deadpan expression as she replied, "I may be a hedonistic ex-villainous, but that doesn't mean I can't be practical about it, you know." Ochako was silent for a moment before she begrudgingly admitted, "Okay, we'll consider having her in the 𝐎𝐵." Suddenly, a loud explosion could be heard from ahead the three students. Shocked, they all rushed towards the source of the explosion, which actually came from the support workshop. Fearing for the worst as they saw thick smoke coming out of the workshop, they got ready to fight when a familiar voice spoke. That one definitely did not work as intended." Blinking in surprise and recognition, Izuku asked, "𝗧𝗵𝗲-san." Emerging from the smoke, Mei turned her attention towards Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu and said, "Oh, hey there. Aren't you three from a while ago at the sports festival?" As the smoke cleared, Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu were shocked to see that Mei's black top was damaged by the explosion to the point that her upper torso was basically naked. Izuku looked away and cried, 𝗧𝗵𝗲-san, please cover yourself." Mei blinked at Izuku before she looked down and realized that her large chest was exposed. Having enough decency to at least cover it with her left arm, even though she was actually unconcerned about the exposure, she then replied, "Sorry about that." So, how have things been going on at the heroes department? What are your names again? Tsuyu was the first to respond as she replied, my name's 𝐒𝐗𝐲𝐔𝐩𝐝. She then gestured towards Ochako, who was pouting at the blushing Izuku, and introduced them to Mei. These two are Uraraka Ochako and Midoriya Izuku. You were their teammate during the cavalry battle portion of the sports festival, 𝐭. Oh yeah. I remember being with you too and that bird-headed fellow, said Mei. She then turned around to go back into the workshop and said, well then, I've got to go back to my babies, so see you three later. Wait, Hatsum-san, said Izuku, who then added, we actually came here to get some upgrades for our costumes and support gear. Suddenly, Mei stood before him with both of her hands on his shoulders as she happily exclaimed without a care about her swaying melons, you've got my attention. She then dragged Izuku into the workshop to show him her babies. Ochako and Tsuyu were stunned for a moment before they rushed in to both get their equipment and protect Izuku from the apparently manic girl. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 mentally grinned as she told Ochako and Tsuyu, I like her. A short while later, so you're telling me that you want me to make a baby that will help you detect hidden tracking devices, right? Asked Mei, who was still half naked and already had a copy of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 in her head. As for how it had happened, she was alone with Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu in the workshop, and she was basically feeling up Izuku's body to get his measurements, which gave 𝗧𝗵𝗲 an opportunity to brainjack her without her notice. Both Ochako and Tsuyu had not enjoyed seeing Mei being so physically NTMT with Izuku without his consent. Izuku was blushing as he nodded and explained, we also need your expertise to make devices that will help us detect or track villains as well. Although he had had CC with Ochako and Tsuyu, he was still embarrassed to see Mei's naked melons, which were even bigger than theirs. Mei grinned like a maniac as she replied, you've gotten yourselves a deal. I'll make those detection babies as soon as I'm done with your hero costumes. Although Izuku was glad that Mei readily agreed to help them, he was still nervous as he spoke about the other matter. So, about the plan, Mei waved her hand dismissively and replied, don't worry about it. Since this is Ned's idea, I can always sue him if that plan goes south. Besides, you seem to be a pretty good guy, so I don't mind getting to know more about you and your girlfriends. Izuku sighed in relief and said, all right then. We'll let 𝗫𝗓-sensei know that you're in on the plan, and give you permission to enter the 1A dorms. You do that while I upgrade your support gear and suits, said Mei, who was eager to start making her next baby. You might want to wear a shirt first, 𝗏, said Tsuyu, who had a deadpan expression on her normally blank face. Back at the 1A dorms, Izuku and Ochako were sweating bullets as they faced their classmates who were all waiting for them and Tsuyu at the dorms. It was clear that they wanted answers from all three of them. Mina was the first to speak as she grinned and asked with a faux accusatory one in her voice, so, care to tell us about what you three did last night? I'm pretty sure the noises you three made yesterday were not snores. Izuku looked away from his classmates as he tried to explain, well, we had AC just as you all suspected, 𝗏, said Tsuyu. Izuku and Ochako were both shocked as they yelled in unison, TQ-chan. It's not like we can lie to them. Especially not after how loud I was while you F me like a wild beast at my request, 𝗏, replied Tsuyu, who somehow still had a blank look on her blushing face. Everyone in the common room of the dorm froze for a single moment which seemed to stretch for eternity before all hell broke loose. You what? Shouted Minoru, Denki and Hanta, who were shocked and outraged that Izuku not only had AC with two cute girls but even, as Tsuyu herself had put it, F one of them like a wild beast. Holy, swore Ijiro, who found it hard to believe that an innocent-looking boy like Izuku had actually done such a thing. If he was being perfectly honest, he had to admit that Izuku was manlier than expected. Tenya was too shocked to even say a word, while Tokoyami 𝗵𝗃𝗁𝐻, a male student with the head of a crow with a yellow beak and red sharp eyes, simply said, it seems that our innocent hero has indulged himself in a mad banquet of bestial lust. Aoyama Yuga, another male student with a feminine face, blonde hair and indigo eyes, nodded in agreement with 𝗵𝗃𝗁𝐻 and said, to think that such a sparkling symbol of innocence could be such a beast. Wait, what do you mean by at your request? Asked Mashireo, who was beginning to suspect that Tsuyu wanted to have rough AC with Izuku. Tsuyu did not hesitate to reply, well, I was basically in heat at the time, so I asked Izuku-chan to. Izuku and Ochako suddenly slapped their hands onto her mouth to keep her quiet as Izuku desperately tried to defuse the situation, as she asked me to have a seat with her, and nothing more than that. That's right, added Ochako. None of the other students bought their desperate attempt to hide the truth for even a second as Kyuka spoke with a deadpan expression on her blushing face. Tsuyu's moans and croaks were loud enough for me and Mina to hear them as clear as day. There's no way in hell Izuku didn't have Tsuyu like an animal, and I'm willing to bet that she wanted it that way. Kyuka was technically telling the truth as she had actually heard every word of Tsuyu's perverted request thanks to her keen sense of hearing. Both Izuku and Ochako blushed bright crimson as they looked away from Kyuka due to the simple fact that they could not deny the truth. In Azui-chan's kinkier than I thought, said Denki. Minoru scowled angrily as he spoke. So what's next? The fact that Midoriya has a big PP too. Izuku and Ochako stuttered in shock while Tsu tapped her finger onto her mouth with a thoughtful expression on her face and replied, well, I can't really say for certain since I only saw my father's and my little brother's penises before I saw Izuku-chan's, Karo. That said, his PP is definitely on the bigger side and it does not fit with his face at all. Tsuyu was technically telling the truth as it was 𝗬𝗵𝗲 who originally had extensive knowledge on erect penises before she shared her memories with her, Ochako and Izuku. Even though Izuku's PP was not the largest 𝗬𝗵𝗲 had ever seen, it was undeniably large when compared to most people. Another moment of stunned silence passed before Minoru growled while comical crimson tears of BLD flowed from his eyes. Midoriya, I hate you so much right now. Katsuki huffed haughtily and said, who the bloody F cares? It's not like a big PP is going to make you the next #1 pro hero. No, but it would make you popular with the ladies, argued Hanta. I wouldn't be too sure, said a tall male student with a muscular wide build, short spiky brown hair, round nose and full lips named Sato Rikido, who then explained, there's got to be a limit on the whole idea of bigger is better in bed. I mean, you can only add so much sugar into a cake before it becomes too sweet to taste good after all. Everyone stared at Rikido as though he had grown a second head and had the same general thought. Seriously, you're using sugar content as an analogy for PP size. Although 𝗬𝗵𝗲 was just as incredulous about the unusual analogy, she was willing to admit to Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu. He does have a point though. Oversized cocks and dildos are not fun to deal with unless you already have a loose PP, and they tend to permanently loosen the holes they penetrate, if you get what I mean. Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu blushed in unison in response as they had the same general thought. We so didn't need to know that. Anyway, if that's all, can you let us through? Asked Izuku, who then explained, we kind of made a mess of Tsuyu-chan's room and we want to help her clean it up to make up for it. Sure. Under one condition, said Mina, who had a mischievous look in her eyes as she added, you need to show us your pages. Wait, what? Exclaimed Izuku and Ochako. How can you even think of suggesting such an immoral action, Ashido-san? Demanded Tenya. Why the F do you even want to look at that useless effer's junk? Asked Katsuki, who was clearly disgusted by the idea. I hate to admit it, but, considering how loud they were when they had SEC, especially Tsuyu, even I'm curious about it, said Kyuka. So let's have a vote, suggested Mina, who then said, anyone who wants to see Izuku's PP, please raise your hands. Shockingly enough for the boys in the class, Mina, Toru, Kyuka and even Momo raised their hands immediately. As for the boys themselves, Tenya and Katsuki adamantly refused while Shudo was actually about to raise his hand before he ultimately decided against it. As curious as he was, he respected Izuku too much to vote having his PP exposed for the rest of the class to see. Minoru, Denki and Hanta immediately raised their hands, partly because they needed to know if Izuku's PP was really as big as Tsuyu claimed it to be, and partly out of spite towards the seemingly lucky BSTRD who had SEC with 2 girls. The rest of the boys did not raise their hands as they were not interested in seeing Izuku's exposed private part. Since only 7 of the 17 voting students raised their hands, Izuku was spared of further humiliation and he was allowed to go to Tsuyu's room together with Tsuyu and Ochako without further incident. With that said, Mina was not willing to give up on finding out how big Izuku's PP was, and she had the perfect agent to spy on them. Later that evening Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu had just cleaned Tsuyu's room but decided to let it air to remove the lingering heady scent. While the room was being aired, Ochako offered to let Izuku and Tsuyu stay in her room to not only do their homework but also relax after a hard day of training, getting a certain crazy support department student to be a part of Izuku's harem and getting interrogated by their classmates. In theory, they could relax in the common room, but there was no way they could rest in peace in a place where the other girls and a few of the boys could badger them for answers and details. Izuku's room was also out of the question as Tenya and Mineta would not doubt get in the way. After finishing their homework, which was thankfully not all that much due to the extended training hours, Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu simply relaxed around her small table. As they relaxed, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 mentally asked Ochako, "So, you're not going to have 𝐒𝐳 today?" "My girly bits are still a little sore from yesterday and we still have training tomorrow, so I'm not planning to do that again anytime soon," replied Ochako, who was a bit disappointed that she could not experience the pleasure again. Understanding Ochako's reasoning, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 then suggested, "But there's no harm in cuddling, right?" Ochako smiled in agreement with 𝗬𝗵𝗲 and shifted herself so that she could lean against Izuku, who blushed at being so close to her. Ochako happily nuzzled into Izuku's shoulder and neck and said, "Sorry, Deku. I just want to cuddle with you like this." Tsuyu was all too eager to follow Ochako's example and leaned against Izuku's body in the same manner. Being cold-blooded due to her quirk, Tsuyu enjoyed the warmth of Izuku's body as she spoke. "To be honest, I'm grateful that we went through all that drama 2 nights ago. If we hadn't, we wouldn't be able to be so close to one another now, Karo." Both Izuku and Ochako knew that Tsuyu was actually referring to 𝗬𝗵𝗲's attempt to brainjack all 3 of them and could not help but agree with her. Their mutual and honest agreement over the matter caused the slime girl to metaphorically blush bashfully as she mentally replied, "Well, I'm also glad that I met you 3. If I hadn't, I probably would never feel so safe and secure for the rest of my life." Izuku smiled at simply being together with Ochako, Tsuyu and 𝗬𝗵𝗲 as he reached out and held onto the waists of the 2 girls who were leaning against him. Suddenly, Izuku had an embarrassing thought and blushed. Noticing his sudden blush, Ochako asked, "What's wrong, Deku?" Izuku chuckled sheepishly as he explained, "It's pretty silly, but I just realized that I never touched your melons or butts before having 𝐂𝐳 with you both." Ochako, Tsuyu and even the mental image of 𝗬𝗵𝗲 blinked in unison before they all snorted and laughed at Izuku's amusing revelation. Ochako was laughing especially heartily when she spoke, "You're right, it is pretty silly." She then started to smile mischievously as she asked, "So do you want to correct that mistake, Deku?" "Why, you sure? I wouldn't want to make you sore all over again. At least not today anyway," replied Izuku. "It's not like we'll definitely have 𝐒𝐳 again. Also, I do want to feel your hands on me," argued Ochako. "I would like that too, Karo," agreed Tsuyu. "I know I don't have a solid body of my own, but I definitely want to know how your hands will feel on their bodies," added 𝗬𝗵𝗲's copy in Izuku's head. Izuku smiled in response and said, "Well, if you're all willing, I'm not one to refuse." Upon hearing Izuku's response, both Ochako and Tsuyu got off Izuku so that they could remove their clothes until they only had their panties on. As for Izuku, he also took off his clothes while he was still seated until he only had his briefs on. Thankfully for him, he had a few briefs which were not hero-themed and he was seriously considering getting more of them to avoid embarrassing himself in the future. The last thing he wanted was to be caught wearing only his lucky all-might briefs or, worse yet, dirtying them due to SXL activities. As soon as they were almost naked, both Ochako and Tsuyu sat down beside Izuku in such a way that the 2 girls were facing each other. More confident than before, Izuku took the initiative as he reached out to gently hold onto Ochako's shoulders. Ochako shivered in response as his warm hands started to gently slide them. His hands then started to explore the rest of her upper body and face as they stroked and touched her neck, upper back, face, cheeks and ears. Izuku's eyes shone with both tender love and keen analysis as he was determined to find the best ways to pleasure the brown-haired girl. Ochako could feel his eyes taking in her every response and knew that she was going to turn into warm putty in his hands at the rate he was going. When he finally reached out to touch her melons, Ochako was close to giving in to her SXL urges in spite of her initial plan to avoid having section. Izuku was about to tease the irked pink peaks of 𝗀𝗏𝗄's melons when 𝗬𝗏 hugged him from behind and said, "Izu-chan, please don't just focus on 𝗀𝗏𝗄-chan. I want you to touch me too, Kero." Although Izuku was a little surprised by 𝗬𝗏's admittedly understandable neediness, Izuku smiled in response and said, "Sure thing, 𝗬𝗏-chan." He then started to shift his attention towards 𝗬𝗏 as he gently touched and stroked her upper body and face the same way as he had done to 𝗀𝗏𝗄. In spite of being a little disappointed, 𝗀𝗏𝗄 knew better than to be jealous of 𝗬𝗏 for getting her dose of Izuku's warm hands, which were strong yet tender. Instead, 𝗀𝗏𝗄 hugged Izuku and allowed her melons to press against his body as she nuzzled into his back. Suddenly, 𝗀𝗏𝗄 noticed something and had to ask, "Deku, do you want to have 𝐒𝐴 again?" "I would be lying if I said no, but I know better than to insist on it since you two need to rest after last night and today," replied Izuku, who then asked, "Why do you ask?" "Well, a certain something is saying otherwise," said 𝗀𝗏𝗄, who pointed towards Izuku's underwear. Both Izuku and 𝗬𝗏 looked downwards and realized that his pee-pee was obviously irked even with his briefs on. Izuku blushed sheepishly and replied, "Well, I'm touching you both in pretty sexual ways, so I can't say it's abnormal for that to happen." 𝗬𝗏 and 𝗀𝗏𝗄 blushed at the sight when their respective copies of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 mentally spoke to them. "You know, none of us said that we can't enjoy a bit of good old 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 and 𝐒𝐻 Unable to disagree with 𝗧𝗵𝗲's statement, and admittedly eager for pleasure, 𝗬𝗏 suddenly extended her frog-like tongue into Izuku's briefs to wrap around his throbbing member. Izuku gasped in shock before 𝗬𝗏's tongue started to slide his phallus. As for 𝗀𝗏𝗄, she started to touch and slide his upper body and face the same way he had done to both her and 𝗬𝗏. The soft pads on her fingertips made her touches even more pleasurable to feel. Overwhelmed by the unexpected tag team, Izuku closed his eyes shut to stop himself from ejaculating prematurely. Emboldened and turned on by his response, 𝗬𝗏 pulled down his wet briefs to fully expose his tongue-wrapped pee-pee and then swallowed the whole thing into her mouth. Izuku's whole body jolted as he could not only feel her tongue still coiling round his pee-pee but also feel the back of her throat as she sucked onto it. 𝗀𝗏𝗄 was also amazed as 𝗬𝗏 easily took in his pee-pee while coiling it with her long tongue at the same time thanks to her frog-like physiology. Determined to not only make Izuku feel good but also not lose out to 𝗬𝗏, 𝗀𝗏𝗄 hugged him in such a way that his face was buried into her melons and said, "Why you can SCK my melons, Deku." Izuku did not need further encouragement as he stared to kiss, suckle, lick and even nibble on one of 𝗀𝗏𝗄's irked nipples. Not expected such pleasure, 𝗀𝗏𝗄 gasped and held onto Izuku to steady herself as well as pull him deeper into her embrace. She bit her lower lip as she tried to stop herself from 𝗵𝗲 too loudly in pleasure. Before long, Izuku climaxed and filled 𝗬𝗏's mouth and throat with his seed. Instead of gulping it in or spitting it put, 𝗬𝗏 held it in her mouth and then reached out to kiss 𝗀𝗏𝗄. Knowing what was to come, 𝗀𝗏𝗄 eagerly accepted the kiss as her tongue tried to wrestle with 𝗬𝗏's undeniably superior tongue and swallowed Izuku's 𝐎𝗏𝗔𝐿. Eventually, Izuku, 𝗀𝗏𝗄 and 𝗬𝗏 had to breathe and they separated to catch their breaths. The two girls then noticed that Izuku's pee-pee was still irked, which caused 𝗀𝗏𝗄 to ask, "Just how much stamina does your boy here have?" "Honestly, I don't really know," admitted Izuku, who then noticed something was off and asked, "Say, 𝗀𝗏𝗄-chan, is it just me or is there a leak in your room?" Both 𝗀𝗏𝗄 and 𝗬𝗏 turned their attention towards where Izuku was looking at and realized that there were a few drops of liquid on the floor of a vacant spot in 𝗀𝗏𝗄's room. Then, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 mentally asked Izuku, 𝗀𝗏𝗄 and 𝗬𝗏, "Don't you three have an invisible classmate?" Realization struck all three of them like thunderbolts as Izuku and 𝗀𝗏𝗄 yelled in unison, 𝗓𝗓𝗄𝗏-san. Suddenly, a certain invisible girl named 𝗬𝗏 sped past the stunned trio, opened the door and ran away from them as quickly as she could while apologizing, "Sorry, couldn't resist." Had the gaping trio paid attention, they would have noticed a trail of spots which were actually 𝗬𝗏's vaginal fluids as she ran into Mina's room to hide and tell the pink girl the juicy details. After an awkward moment of silently staring at the open door, Izuku asked, "So do you guys want to continue or call it a night? Considering that 𝗬𝗏-chan has pretty much ruined the mood and we should avoid making ourselves tired and sore tomorrow morning, calling it a night sound like a good idea right now," said 𝗬𝗏. Ochako sighed in disappointment and said, "Might as well." 𝗬𝗵𝗲 was also disappointed as she groaned. "This sucks." Izuku smiled as he tried to cheer everyone up. "Look on the bright side. Spending the night in our respective rooms will give Aizawa-sensei a little less reason to expel us if given the chance." Ochako snorted in amusement in spite of her disappointment and said, "Yeah, I can see that as a plus." Before long, the three lovers got dressed and hugged and kissed one another in surprisingly chaste ways before leaving for their respective rooms. Yes, even Ochako and Tsuyu hugged and kissed one another. While Izuku made his way back to his room, he blushed as he noticed that all the boys in the common room were staring or glaring at him. Mineta, Denki and Hanta flipped the bird at him out of spite while Idru and even Shudo gave him a thumbs up. When Izuku finally reached his room, he lay on his bed with an exhausted groan and said, "I just got back into my room and I already want to go back to Ochako-chan and Tsuyu-chan." "Well, I can be your sleeping partner for the night if you don't mind," said 𝗬𝗵𝗲, who was making similar offers to Ochako and Tsuyu through her copies. Izuku smiled appreciatively as said, "Thank you, 𝗬𝗵𝗲-chan." As soon as Izuku thanked the slime girl, she oozed out of his ear and took the form of a small ball of slime with a pair of black eye spots for eyes. Izuku idly noted that 𝗬𝗵𝗲 seemed firmer and even had eyelashes before he hugged her and allowed himself to fall asleep. A short while ago, in Mina's room, Mina was gaping like a fish out of water before she asked Toru, "You're serious?" Toru nodded vigorously in spite of being both naked and invisible and replied, "Midoriya-kun's PP is really big and Tsuyu-chan could swallow the whole thing like a champ. He was still hard and big even after leaking once." Mina grinned like a cat that ate the canary and said, "I'm so telling everyone about this." In less than 5 minutes, every student from Class 1A, including even Katsuki, got a message from Mina which went as follows. "Big news, everyone. Our invisible girl, Hagakure Toru, has discovered that our cute cinnamon roll, Midoriya Izuku, has a really big boy that is over 7 inches long and doesn't go down even after releasing a load. Tsuyu-chan was not shitting us." Not surprisingly, the boys were impressed, annoyed or jealous about the revelation concerning Izuku's impressive genius. As for the 2 remaining girls who did not know, namely Momo and Kyuka, they became embarrassed as they though about how Izuku's large phallus somehow went deep into Ochako and Tsuyu's nether parts when the 3 of them had section. It was only a matter of time before news of Izuku's impressive members spread around the school. Boku no Hero Academia. Izuku's 𝐒𝐻𝗵𝗲 Academia disclaimer. This is amateur-rated fanfiction story of Boku no Hero Academia that I am writing for RDC fun. Needless to say, this story is AU. The characters may seem OOC to some and there will be smutty lemons. Also, I own nothing of the series other than the fanfiction stories that I make. Chapter 3. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 and Toru. Izuku woke up from his slumber and was glad that he had 𝗬𝗵𝗲 with him to keep him company as he hated the idea of waking up alone after spending 2 nights with Ochako and Tsuyu. He smiled affectionately at the cute ball of slime and stroked it gently, causing it to quiver in response. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 soon woke up and looked up at him with a sleepy look on its face. The slime girl then woke up fully and had a mischievous look in its eyes before it suddenly rushed into his pants. Barely keeping himself from crying out in panic, Izuku whispered, "What are you doing, 𝗬𝗵𝗲-chan?" Izuku got his answer soon enough as something warm and slimy suddenly engulfed his morning wood and even started to ooze through his urethra to reach his bladder and 𝐵. He quickly covered his own mouth with his hands to stop himself from gasping in pleasure while his whole body shivered and shook due to 𝗬𝗵𝗲's apparent attempt to give him her own version of 𝐒𝐻. He could feel 𝗬𝗵𝗲's slimy appendage moving in and out of his urethra while the rest of her slime-like body stroked and massaged the glands of his phallus. Normally, insertion of a foreign object into the urethra has to be done carefully to prevent urinal incontinence, damaging the urethra and infections. However, since 𝗬𝗵𝗲's soft and slimy appendage could change shape to perfectly fit into Izuku's urethra without causing harm to it, Izuku felt little to no discomfort as he felt new sensations which he did not even realize were possible. And not even Tsuyu-chan can do something crazy like this, thought Izuku. As for 𝗬𝗵𝗲, due to being comfortable with being her true slime girl self with not only Izuku but also Ochako and Tsuyu, She was perfectly happy to make use of her increased physical and mental freedom to pleasure all three of them in her own way. Indeed, just as 𝗬𝗵𝗲 was pleasuring Izuku's member with her slime-like body, her physical copies did their own versions of 𝗬𝗏𝗧 on both 𝗧𝗏𝗀 and 𝗬𝗏. Both girls were rendered helpless as their respective physical copies of 𝗬𝗵𝗲 started to insert themselves into their increasingly moist nether parts to the point of oozing into their very wombs. 𝗧𝗏𝗀 and 𝗬𝗏's SXL pleasure only grew as 𝗬𝗵𝗲 started to slide and massage their irked clitorises and even insert narrow slimy probes into their urethras to stimulate them. Before long, Izuku started to slide his own pee-pee while 𝗧𝗏𝗀 and 𝗬𝗏 fingered their own private parts to bring themselves to orgasm. It should be noted that, due to past trauma involving a former host who had a FTSH for excrement, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 stayed clear of their anuses. Due to the intense sensations on not only his phallus but also the urethra of the said phallus, Izuku quickly climaxed, which caused 𝗬𝗵𝗲's body to swell with his white seed. While Izuku breathed heavily to recover from the intense orgasm, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 slowly oozed out of his still irked member and reformed into its previous state as a cute-looking ball of slime. Speaking of climaxes, 𝗧𝗏𝗀 and 𝗬𝗏 also climaxed, and each copy of 𝗬𝗵𝗲 fed on their expelled vaginal fluids. After Izuku caught his breath, he noticed something off about 𝗬𝗵𝗲 and asked, 𝗬𝗵𝗲-chan, is it just me or are you changing? Although 𝗬𝗵𝗲 still appeared as a cute-looking ball of slime, it was apparent that she not only had eyelashes, just like the previous night, but even had round bright pink blushes on her cheeks, and a small fold which formed a cat-like mouth. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 nodded and placed an elongated slimy appendage into Izuku's ear to fully explain to him through her link with her host, I think I am. This has never happened before. Being a keen analyst on quirks even before he became a student of high school, Izuku asked her, do you think it's because you no longer need to keep constant control over us like with your previous hosts? That might actually be the case, said 𝗬𝗵𝗲, who then added, I never felt truly relaxed or safe until I met the three of you after all. Given the fact that you didn't develop while you were in your previous hosts due to your constant need to be in control, it's probably safe to assume that your lack of development is either due to a mental block caused by stress or due to energy expenditure to keep your previous hosts constantly under control. Now that you're with us and you no longer need to maintain constant control, there may be a chance that you will not only grow and develop but possibly even gain new abilities. Some possible abilities that you might gain as a result may include shape-shifting while outside of your host, the ability to form a biological armor to protect your own host, the ability to alter your host's body to better suit your needs, or even, whoa there, Izuku. Slow down a bit, exclaimed 𝗬𝗵𝗲, who then said, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Sure, I might be changing a bit, but that's no reason to assume that I'll change even more in the future or regain your original body, asked Izuku. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 nodded with a troubled expression on her face. Izuku smiled reassuringly and said, 𝗬𝗵𝗲-chan, listen to me. 𝗧𝗏𝗀-chan, 𝗬𝗏-chan and I all love you and we won't care if you somehow regain your original body. But what if I can't help you find the spy after I regain my body? What if things turn bad between the three of you because I'm no longer a brain-jacking slime that keeps everyone together due to being my useless original self? Asked 𝗬𝗵𝗲, who had an unmistakably sad expression on her face. It was apparent that she had a low opinion of her past self due to years of abuse. 𝗬𝗵𝗲-chan, had you never entered our lives, I would not have even known how much 𝗧𝗏𝗀-chan and 𝗬𝗏-chan actually cared for me, much less loved me. You have done much more good for us than you probably even realize, said Izuku, who then added, besides, you of all people should know that we'll never think that way about you. Well aware of Izuku's past as a quirkless boy and his downright heroic nature, as well as 𝗧𝗏𝗀 and 𝗬𝗏's overall good nature, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 knew that he was being completely honest with her. However, she was still afraid of the possibility of becoming human again. Sensing her fear, Izuku said, no one is forcing you to regain your original body. If it does happen, it'll either be because it is unavoidable or, just as likely if not even more so, you have accepted being your original self again. In spite of her lingering fears and insecurities, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 smiled and said, you really are a hero at heart, you know that. Well, I do want to be a hero who can save people with a smile just like All Might after all, replied Izuku, who was smiling bashfully before he asked, "So do you want me to hug you before we go?" "I would like that very, very much, Izuku-kun," said 𝗬𝗵𝗲. Izuku smiled at the nickname she had just given him as he gave her a warm and loving hug, which she tried to return in kind with an adorably small pair of stubby protrusions that were supposed to be her arms before she had to return back into his head. Before long, Izuku started his day at high school together with his classmates. A short while later, Toshinori blinked when he saw Mina and Toru running away from Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu during training. He then turned his attention towards Shoyuta, who was standing beside him, and asked, "Are they doing some kind of special training by any chance?" Shoyuta huffed irritably as he explained, "Hardly. They're just upset that Toru had spied on them yesterday and Mina sent a message to everyone in class about Izuku's, and I'm quoting here, really big boy that is over 7 inches long and doesn't go down even after releasing a load." Toshinori blushed at the obvious innuendo and said, "Ah, that explains why they're chasing after the two of them." He then noted that Mina and Toru were pulling off some impressive moves to avoid getting captured by Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu, who were determined to get back at them. He could not help but smile as he commented, "Silliness aside, they're doing surprisingly well, all things considered." "Nothing like running or fighting for your life to develop some new moves," agreed Shoyuta, who smirked as Toru's invisible body started to refract light that was passing through it to blind her 3 pursuers, while Mina used her corrosive acid quirk so that she could literally run up a steep incline to the top of a towering rock formation. Although stunned, Izuku, Ochako, and Tsuyu quickly regained their bearings, and Tsuyu's eyes began to take in infrared light as she sought to find Toru. She then disappeared as her skin color and body temperature changed to match with her surroundings. Ochako, on the other hand, used her zero-gravity quirk to make Izuku weightless and threw him upwards so that he could catch up with Mina. Upon seeing the incoming human projectile, Mina used her acid quirk to literally create a narrow hole beneath her feet and escape. Undeterred, Izuku delivered a strong kick to shatter the weakened rock formation, forcing Mina to jump out to escape. Ochako then shouted, "Deku, I'm going to release you." Izuku knew what Ochako meant and said, "Do it, Ochako-chan." Since Izuku knew what she was about to do, Ochako pressed her fingers together to deactivate her zero-gravity quirk so that Izuku would not float into the sky. Gravity quickly took hold of Izuku, but he was prepared for it, so he landed safely onto the broken rock formation and quickly sped off to catch Mina. Ochako quickly followed Izuku's lead to capture the pink girl. Realizing that she was about to be captured, and determined to avoid retribution from Ochako and Izuku, Mina created a veil of acid to both distract them and block their line of sight. To counter Mina's defense, Izuku leapt over the veil and quickly tried to grab her to stop her escape. In his attempt to grab Mina, he accidentally tore her skin-tight bodysuit, thereby exposing her naked lower half for all to see. His keen observational skills made him realize that Mina had a rather nice bottom, which was probably due to being both a dancer and a hero in training. A moment of awkward silence passed before Mina blushed and screamed at the top of her lungs while hiding her naked girly bits. Izuku immediately prostrated before Mina and apologized. I'm so sorry for ripping your suit, Ashido-san." Shoyuta sighed at the ridiculous turn of events and then said, "Ashido, you're excused to leave and get yourself properly dressed. Uraraka, go with her to make sure she gets changed unmolested. As for you, Midoriya, I know that this mess is an accident, but do let go of that ripped piece of bodysuit and get back to training." All 3 students quickly followed Shuta's instructions, and Izuku handed the ripped piece of bodysuit to Ochako, who followed Mina to the changing room. Mina was blushing with tears welled up in her eyes as she thought, "He's the first boy to ever see my naked butt and girly bits up close." In the girls' changing room, both Ochako and Mina were in the girls' changing room when Ochako placed her arms akimbo and said, "This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't decided to tell everyone in class about Deku's boy bits, you know." Mina pouted at Ochako and argued, "You of all people should know that I love hearing romantic stories. How can I not be curious about what you 3 are doing, especially after you had SEC right above my room?" "And what does that have to do with telling everyone in class?" asked Ochako, who was still frowning at the acidic girl while also sporting a blush, as she could not refute the fact that she and Tsuyu had SEC with Izuku directly above Mina's room. Mina had the decency to be sheepish as she answered, "Oh, I'll admit that I probably should have kept it to just the girls in our class, but the only girls who did not know at the time were Jiryu-chan and Yamamoe. Besides, even Todoroki-kun seemed curious about Izuku." Ochako raised an eyebrow and asked, "Seriously?" She knew from sharing memories with Izuku that the green-haired boy was clearly heterosexual and only saw Shudo as a friend and comrade. "I'm serious." He was about to raise his hand during the vote to see Izuku's pee-pee before he decided against it, said Mina. Ochako sighed and decided not to argue about the matter further as she spoke to Mina. "You did tell them not to spread that information to the rest of the school at least, right?" Mina suddenly paled and looked away from Ochako as she admitted, "I might have forgotten to add that part." Ochako was ready to throttle the pink-skinned girl, but 𝗏𝗵𝗲 intervened and mentally reminded her, "You do remember that I'm supposed to brainjack Ishido-san and the other 3 girls in Class 1A to determine if any of them is the spy, right? This is as good an opportunity to brainjack her as any." Upon hearing 𝗏𝗵𝗲's reminder, Ochako had an idea. An almost villainous smirk formed on her face as she got closer to Mina and said, "Say, Mina-chan, you wanted to know how Deku, Tsuyu-chan and I got together, right?" "Why yes, I do want to know," replied Mina, who did not like the look in Ochako's eyes and nervously backed away from her. Ochako slowly cornered the nervous pink-skinned girl and said, "Well, the thing is, Tsuyu-chan and I had a bit of help in confessing our feeling for Deku." Mina's back was pressed against the wall when she asked, "Help you say? So, who was the one who helped you?" Ochako placed her hands onto the wall to prevent Mina from escaping and moved in to whisper into her ear, "I'm about to tell you." Suddenly, Mina felt something slimy enter her ear and, before she could even cry out for help, her body was immobilized. Mina's eyes rolled back while drool started to flow from the side of her mouth and her body twitched in a futile attempt to fight off the parasitic takeover of her body. Panic started to swell in her chest when she heard Ochako's voice in her head, "While 𝗏𝗵𝗲-chan is looking through your memories, I'll show you what really happened between Tsuyu-chan, Deku and me." Mina was about to ask Ochako what was going on when she saw Ochako's memories of what had happened to her, Tsuyu, Izuku and the slime girl named 𝗏𝗏𝗲. Although there were parts that were left out, including most of 𝗏𝗏𝗲 and Izuku's backstories, details on One for All and Ochako's SXL experiences with Izuku, Tsuyu and 𝗏𝗏𝗲, Mina saw more than enough to realize that she was in no real danger from the brain-jacking ex-Villainous. By the time 𝗏𝗏𝗲 had finished looking through Mina's memories and verified that she was not a villainous spy or even a sleeper agent, she was calm enough to not totally flip the heck out when she regained control over her own body in spite of having 𝗏𝗏𝗲's copy in her own head. "Wow, this situation feels like the kind of crazy story a corny bugger would cook up to fulfill his SXL fantasies," said Mina. Ochako could not help but chuckle in agreement and said, "Well, it can't be any worse than the kind of sleazy pawn Mineta's bound to have in his collection." "Oh, I won't doubt that," said Mina, who then added, "So, how do you plan to get the others?" Surprised by Mina's inquiry, Ochako raised an eyebrow and asked, "You do realize that we're essentially going to let 𝗏𝗏𝗲-chan brainjack the others in our class, the girls' Class 1B and possibly even other people like Midnight Sensei, right?" Mina shrugged and said, "Look, if this crazy HRM plan works, we'll be able to stop the League of Villains from attacking us again like back at summer camp. Besides, this is Nezu-sensei's plan, so it has to have a pretty good chance of being a success." "And you're not against the idea of being a member of Deku's HRM?" asked Ochako. "Well, I'll have to get to know him more to really decide if I want to be in his HRM. Besides, I don't have a boyfriend at the moment and I'm pretty sure that Toru-chan, Jiryu-chan and Yamamoe are still single too," explained Mina. Recalling the girls' discussion on boyfriends back at summer camp, Ochako had to admit that Mina was not wrong. Nevertheless, Ochako had to ask her, "But what about Kirishima-kun? He's known you since middle school after all." Indeed, as Ochako recalled from previous conversations with Mina, the pink-skinned girl and Ijuru had actually known each other since middle school. Mina smiled and admitted, "We certainly have known each other since middle school, but that's exactly the reason why I know that he's not interested in being my boyfriend. He wants to be a great hero who never has any regrets, and I doubt he'll even think about dating until he achieves that dream." Ochako frowned and asked, Deku wants to be a great hero too, but that didn't stop him from developing feelings for me even before 𝗬𝗵𝗲 came into the picture. True, but I get the feeling that he's more into bromance rather than romance. Also, while he's undoubtedly a good friend and fellow hero in training, he's not really my type as a boyfriend, explained Mina. Deciding to trust Mina's judgment, especially since 𝗬𝗵𝗲 had said nothing to contradict her claims even after looking through her memories, Ochako said, "Well, if you say so, I suppose you can be a part of the ℔. Just know that you don't have to join us immediately and you can even back out of it if you want. Trust me, there'll no turning back or backing out once you look into Deku's memories." Mina nodded and said, "I'll keep that in mind, Ochako-chan." Later that day, Izuku had just finished his training and was walking towards the support department workshop to find out if Mei had made any progress on the requested support items. As he made his way to the workshop, he heard another loud explosion and sighed as he understandably assumed that one of Mei's experimental support items had blown up again. In spite of his exasperation, Izuku quickened his pace to reach the workshop, which was clearly smoking. He could also hear the exasperated yelling of a short and skinny man with spiky ginger and dull blue eyes hair named 𝗵𝗲 𝗵𝗃. Also known as the pro-hero power loader, Higuri was yelling at Mei for creating yet another insane invention that had exploded. Izuku hesitantly asked the irate teacher, "Excuse me, power loader sensei. Is now a bad time for me to be here?" Noticing the boy, Higuri replied, "That depends on whether you're here for business or for socializing." Well aware that Higuri was in no mood to put up with anyone interrupting him to socialize with the apparently unrepentant Mei, Izuku quickly answered, "I'm here for business with Mei, my friends, and I requested her to make some support items for us." "Friends as in girlfriends?" asked Higuri. Surprised, Izuku blushed and asked, "Excuse me." Higuri took out his smartphone and said, "There's no point in hiding it, Midoriya." He then showed Izuku a message as he added, "Even as we speak, news of your girlfriends and your impressive genitalia are making the rounds in the entire school to the point that even the teachers got word of it as spam." Izuku made a comically high-pitched noise which sounded similar to a cat which was receiving a colonoscopy as he read the message that stated, "Big news, everyone. Thanks to certain sources from our insiders in Class 1, we now know